Thank you. Amy Carroll.
Here.
George Blauville.
Here.
Todd Lavieri.
Here.
Chris Labrie.
Here.
Michael Chin.
Here.
See him? Good. And Maria Weingarten.
Here.
Yep, good. Robert Hamill
Here.
and Victor Alvarez.
Here.
All present.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so two things. We've got 2 minutes to approve. We've got the, I need a motion to approve the minutes for the January 12th regular meeting, but then also we have the motion. I need a motion for the minutes and the other related items on the executive session that we had on the 12th as well. So one motion ought to do it.
Move to approve.
George, thank you. Amy, second. All in favor, please raise your hands. Aye, opposed? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Kevin, why don't you go ahead and kick us off, give us a little bit of an update, and then we'll turn it over to Linda.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I have a few items I will report on. I think you all heard my out call last night on COVID. We're doing very well with our testing weekly at Lapham, 3 days a week. The superintendent's about to go to the other 3 days a week. We're doing Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And we are very pleased to start our vaccinations of both 75 and over and 65 and older. We'll do 300 tomorrow at Lapham and another 300 next week. So that's going very well, and I think people are very, very pleased to be able to get their vaccinations in New Canaan. Stanford Hospital is also very available to our residents. So this morning, the Board of Selectmen approved a public safety tower and cell tower on Upper Ponus Ridge Road. We've been working on this location for 2 years. Very pleased to finally get this signed with the Homeland Towers. The way this works is we will go to the siting council with Homeland Towers as the carrier for our public safety antennas. That will expedite the process. And we had a very good conversation last week with a major carrier, and we expect the carrier to sign on before the tower is approved. But I just have to mention one thing. Ordinarily, Homeland Towers would not go to siting council for approval without having a major carrier. They're taking some risk, and therefore we've signed a communications license agreement, which would actually have a springing obligation to pay rent in the future should a carrier not sign on. But for that obligation to arise, Homeland Towers would have to invest $750,000 in building the tower. So, and we also have an option agreement should a carrier never sign on, that we would end up owning the tower for an option price of $50,000. You may remember we had planned a $300,000 public safety tower that the tower would only have public safety on in 2016-17, and the city of Stamford indicated they wouldn't approve it, and because it was on the Stamford line of the Stamford side of the reservoir. And so anyway, we're very, very, very pleased to get this moving forward. Now that we have a northeast tower on Soundview Lane, we'll have a northwest tower to address our need for a permanent public safety tower in the northwest. We will begin to return to some locations down in the western and center part of town to further build out our need for better cell service. The Police Department Building Committee will meet Thursday morning with two architects, the two leading architects in New England for police department buildings. And the CHP project, the wastewater treatment plant, is moving along. The gas line has been installed except for over the bridge, and the equipment is there. So they expect to get operational by March. We had a very good meeting yesterday with the Advisory Committee on Buildings and Infrastructure, and reviewed all of our 37 roofs, including the school roofs, and also reviewed where we stand with Eversource Gas in terms of the restoration of roads this summer, based upon the original installation in 2018. So happy to move that forward this summer. And finally, we passed a budget on to you folks with a total expenditure of $157.68 million, a 2.56% increase, I think, overall, 2.54. We have 6 recommendations at the end of our transmittal letter to you. So with that, I will launch you into your budget season. Good luck for the month of February.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for
Could I
that.
just remind everybody to mute if you're not talking? We're getting, some people are requesting getting feedback. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Tucker. Okay, so Linda and Andrew, if you guys wouldn't mind doing a few minutes on the cash management and banking RFP. And then Linda, you've got a couple items here, a couple of transfer items, a housekeeping and a financial update. Just, you can breeze through those as quickly as you'd like, because we really want to get on to the budget review and obviously the Board of Ed. So I'll turn it over to you and Andrew for the first item on cash management.
Thank you, Todd. Andrew, why don't we present like we did this morning with the Board of Selectmen? I'll let you kick off with an overview and kind of share where we are with the RFP process.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Like Linda mentioned, we presented before the Board of Selectmen today an update. We have 2 RFPs that are currently in the process of being finalized and will be published. We plan this month. The first one is a comprehensive banking services RFP that's going to essentially cover all of our checking accounts, our tax collection process. The last time we went out for bid was back in 2012, before either Linda and myself being in these positions. So we felt it was prudent that we go out to the market, see what types of accounts, and financial institutions we can work with, and so we've shared that document with the town attorney. We've brought Bob Hamill into the mix from the Board of Finance. He's going to act as our liaison, and thank you, Bob, for all the time you've dedicated so far to reading through all these lengthy documents. Linda and I formed a working group that we're both co-chairing with stakeholders, including Tucker, members of the finance department, tax collection department, just to make sure we're hearing all the necessary perspectives and that the contents of the RFP are fully comprehensive for the needs of the town. So I've been really happy with where we're at on that. We got some feedback from the selectmen today, so we plan to incorporate that and meet later this week. The other RFP, I'll quickly just summarize, is a savings/investment account services RFP. This one is more to obtain a better return, or a better yield rather, on our cash that we currently have sitting at Webster. We have some funds that are invested in longer term instruments with Janney and UBS currently, but we also have a lot of cash that we collect during tax collection season in July and January, and then we slowly spend it down over the subsequent months. But our interest rate used to be fantastic. It was actually almost better than some of the longer term rates that we were seeing about a year ago, and then the pandemic happened. So now we're trying to go out and see, can we get a better rate while ensuring that safety and liquidity component that we need, because these are funds that we will eventually use to spend on various approved expenditures. So that RFP is also in the mix and is undergoing the same exact reviews that I just mentioned on the banking services RFP. And Linda, feel free to chime in if there's anything I'm missing, but essentially those are the 2 big efforts that we've been undertaking over the last couple of months. And I think we've made a lot of progress.
Andrew, when do the RFPs go out? When will they actually go to banks?
We plan to distribute them this month, like in the next, I would say 2 weeks or so. Is that correct, Linda? I think that's our timeline is this month.
Yes, we're going to distribute it to the advertiser, and then we'll also post it on our website in our bid section, and then we will also reach out to the bankers that we've worked with in the past, but that'll be happening in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. So and just to be clear, the banking services RFP would have a go live in sync with our fiscal year. So that would be July 1st. So we would plan for that one, given how comprehensive it is, to have a lengthy question and answer process. We'll interview the finalists, and then we'll make a recommendation for the Board of Selectmen to adopt and approve, because ultimately they have to sign off on the contract. For the savings account and a short-term investment account RFP, that one we envision a much quicker implementation. So that one we're hoping to implement in March. And that one is not dependent on other processes. Essentially, it would just entail opening up one account. So that one's a lot simpler to do than the comprehensive one where we're going to be opening up a dozen different accounts for the different funds that the town has.
Any questions from anyone on the board on this project? Shout out to Bob. Thank you. Thank you, Amy, for nominating Bob.
No, they've done a great job. We're very much focused on, safety and security of the funds first. That's, what are the collateral, the actual collateral behind it. And then hopefully we're going to get a better arrangement with a prime bank that will be more straightforward in terms of the services we receive. And right now, Webster doesn't even have a branch in town. So they're sending Brinks trucks to pick up deposits. It's time for a change. I mean, they'll be invited to bid, but be interesting to see what we get offered. But I think we'll come out in a better place and a safer place.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, Andrew. And
Thank
thanks,
you.
Linda, on that one. Okay, Linda, over to you. You're on mute. Still on mute. There we go. Oh, Tucker, what's going on? He's jumping back and forth on mute.
Okay, mute. Linda, we can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So let me quickly walk through the financials. You have them in front of you, and this is the trend that we've been discussing over last couple of weeks. Our total revenues year to date, we're already at 95.7% of total revenues, which is consistent with trend. Our primary driver is obviously property taxes, and we've received a big bulk of the second half tax installments. So year to date, we're at 136.4 million in taxes compared to 136.6 this period last year. So we're over 98% of budget. And as we finish off the year, we look to collect the balance of that without any major issues. We've talked about the lag in parking fees and parking revenue because of some of the decisions that we made in the past, but a lot of that lost revenue is being made up by conveyance fees, and building permits are beginning to pick up again. So total revenues townwide, this period last year, we were at 141.4 million. This year, we're at 141.3. So there's only about $87,000 difference year to date. So that I think we're in good shape, and there's no reason for concern on the expenditure side. And then on the revenue side, we're trending as where we would expect to trend. At this point in the year, we're at 51% total spend on our budget of 153.7, and there are no issues on the spend side either. Everything is consistent with what we're seeing. And although you see as we begin the discussion of the budget, we initially approved the budget with a drawdown of $4.5 million, and then in September, we did a special appropriation for the Board of Ed for $1.5 million, which brings our total budgeted drawdown to $6 million. But based on what we're seeing and based on the trends, I don't anticipate that we will be drawing down $6 million of fund balance by the end of the year. And we will kind of keep monitoring that. But I just want you to factor that in mind as we start the discussion of the budget and how much fund balance is available. The number that we show there is the budgeted number, but we do anticipate that number to be drastically different. I don't anticipate us drawing down. And from what I'm hearing from the Board of Ed and on the town side, that due to COVID, there's also a possibility that we may once again have the same phenomena this year that we did last year with coming in under budget on the spend side. And that's all I have as far as financials. I'd be happy to answer any questions before I kind of go over the transfer requests.
I'll ask the question George is going to ask, which is if we're not going to draw down that amount, what's your projection for the drawdown, if you have one?
I'd say between
Writing
$1
the
million.
question, you could see it.
$1
He's writing
million,
that question
$1.5 million.
out before I asked it, so.
So,
I would
So,
say I don't
Linda, you're
anticipate
saying-
us doing more than $1.5 million.
so maybe 4.5 million is really the right number
No.
For the drawdown?
versus the 6 million that you were projecting?
No, I think 1.5 million versus the 6 million.
Oh, you think the drawdown's going to be 1.5 million?
Yeah. That's the
Yeah.
expectation.
Okay.
Yep, Amy?
Hey, Linda, can you remind me at the end of last year, and I know we did the special payment to the Board of Ed this year for COVID. How much did they come under budget last year, which then added to the general fund? Was it 2 million? When I'm right, 2 million? So was it kind of a wash?
Right. They came in about 2 million under, and then with the 400 that we did at the end of the year and the 1.5 the following year, so that balance was rolled back into Board of Ed, which I believe may be the phenomenon again this year, just because of the unknowns with COVID expenses.
Okay, thank you.
Are there questions from the board on that status? Okay, good update. Thanks, Linda, on that. Let's go to the line items.
Okay, so you have a couple of line item transfers for your review, and these are just interdepartmental moving items along, and these don't require your approval. They're just for your review. And then I do have a set of transfers. These are public works projects. They're buying a truck between the highway department, and we basically underspent on the price of one truck, but another truck came in a little bit over because of some of the add-ons to the truck. And so we're just moving funds from one vehicle to another vehicle, but that does require your approval.
Okay, if there are any questions on that, we could have a motion for that approval for that transfer.
So moved.
Judy, second, Tom? Okay, thank you. All in favor? All right, opposed? None. Okay, Linda, you're good there.
All right.
Okay, well, let's do this. Unless there's any other discussion on those items, let's move into the budget review. I'll turn it over to Linda, but before we get started, and maybe as we kick off our 2021-22 budget session, let me just provide a quick overview and summary for people. As a reminder, over the last 3 years, we've successfully kept the amount raised by taxes flat, which in and of itself is a significant accomplishment. Our spending's been tightly managed, as you've seen now over the last couple of years. While obviously we continue to invest in our schools and our infrastructure, including continuous efforts in the roads, school roofs, new solar projects, and so forth. Through, I think, the careful spending and planning that everyone's executed against, we've been very fortunate to be able to keep taxes from rising, while not cutting school programs or arts or teachers and important social programs, police, fire, as we know many districts have been forced to do across the state. We're very pleased that we've asked our New Canaan taxpayers to actually pay less in total taxation in back-to-back years. This current year has been a challenging one on all fronts. Revenues have been under pressure, as you've heard, but our expenses in some areas also increased related to COVID. We've also had some revenue pickups in some areas, which has also been very helpful. So overall, I would say we weathered this storm pretty well. The year's not over, of course, but I wanted to make a big shout out and a thank you to our town employees, to our teachers, and to the parents and taxpayers who this board serves every day. We really, I think, met the urgent needs of the schools and the students, working with the Board of Ed and the school administration, including a special appropriation of, as you just heard, well over $1 million for COVID-related expenses. So just to recap our guiding principles, as well as some of the basic points regarding the current budget and plan. As always, the single largest expense is going to be for the education. Represents about 60% of our budget. About 68, almost 70% of our budget this year will be spent on education, police, and fire. The remaining 32% will be on a number of things like roads and building maintenance and town employees and pension expense and healthcare and debt service and those sorts of things. We do continue to reduce our debt. We currently have the lowest debt amount the town has seen in over 15 years, as the advertiser reported last fall. Our current debt level is projected to be 95 million in June this year. So our debt level is not a concern. We'll continue to borrow strategically and prudently to do some of the projects that we've talked about. We know we have road repairs and building repairs and so forth, but we want to keep our annual debt expense at a manageable level. Our bond rating continues to be AAA for our guidelines and expectations. Our town pensions are fully funded for our guidelines. Our rainy day unassigned fund balance maintains an appropriate amount to handle the shocks to the system that we're seeing right now, and it has a balance in the range of our targeted benchmark. We'll also continue to evaluate our long-term capital plan, and Kevin mentioned the police station just a minute ago. We obviously agreed to take a pause this fiscal year on our capital spending items and until we had a better view of the impact of the pandemic. But our schools, the police station, the roads, and the library will be among the top areas we will invest in over the next decade. From a Board of Finance perspective, our top priorities continue as before, and we've talked about these in the past. For one, our schools must continue the tradition of being a top district in the state. Two, we must continue to provide just a beautiful downtown with all the surrounding parks, activities, and programs throughout the town. Number three, we really need to continue to provide safety, social, and all the emergency services for our residents and our visitors. And then last, we need to maintain financial strength as a town. We know that we need to do this while also improving or renewing our town assets and to improve the services that we have and support all the things that our residents expect. So in short, provide excellent value while helping New Canaan succeed financially in good times and in bad. So going forward in this new fiscal year cycle, working with the Board of Selectmen, the Town Council, Board of Ed, all the other town departments, we'll continue to look for ways to spend less to help offset or minimize any necessary spending or contractual increases that are out there. The Board of Finance worked really closely with all the departments this year, throughout the year during the pandemic. And the crisis reminds us to challenge our spending and our borrowing assumptions, and we'll continue to be prudent in that regard. Our guidance for the fiscal year overall will be consistent with those operating principles I just went through, namely careful spending, continued investment, maintaining financial disciplines, including tighter cash management that you just heard, and project management, and having modest, if any, tax increases. That's our goal, but that won't be easy this year. We have a few proposals we'll discuss over the next few weeks that we hope can help reduce costs, and we hope the departments also have some ideas to bring forward. We've got some work to do. But tonight we'll start with an overview of the Board of Education budget. We'll continue over the next 2.5 weeks with 3 more nights of department meetings, followed by a public hearing on March 2nd, and then we vote on the budget on March 4th. It then goes over to the Town Council for their input and discussion, and then back to us. We'll finalize the budget, including capital and the final mill rate in May. And with that as a backdrop, I'd like to turn it over back to our CFO, Linda, and he'll go over and give us a quick summary of where we are currently with the budget, and then over to the Board of Education and Dr. Lutzy. So back to you, Linda.
All right, thank you. So real quick, so I don't get into the Board of Ed's time. So we started this process in November, and you recall that you did give some initial guidance on the town side to try and keep it under between not above 2% overall on the town side, which what we strive to do. Our starting point at the time was with a fund balance drawdown of 6.8 million, knowing that this number would change because there are some additional opportunities for revenue increases using other funds, and also keeping in mind that some of the initial submissions that we are looking at will possibly change. And I know we've had discussions with the Board of Ed, which, as you mentioned, is about 60, almost 65% of the total budget, and therefore even minor changes within that budget have a big impact overall in terms of the general fund. And so with that, that's how we moved forward and developed the budget, and the Board of Selectmen approved a balanced budget, which is forwarded to you with that in mind, to basically make up the expenditure requests given the $6.8 million drawdown that we had budgeted. We did receive updated grand list numbers from our tax assessor, which were certified on the 1st which were certified, there was as of the 1st, but they were certified a couple of weeks ago. And so our net taxable grand list right now is at 7.8 million, which is 0.9% higher than what we, from last year. When we went into the process, we did have an estimate of 0.7%, so this is a positive development. However, as you know, we do have now the tax process, and therefore typically that number will adjust somewhat before final approval, and we will know those tax appeals by March. So by the time we vote on the budget in April and set the mill rate in May, we will have an exact number of what that net taxable grand list would be. So just given where things are with that 7.8 million, that does bring the mill rate to about 19.3, assuming 98.5% fund balance drawdown, but that's just kind of by way of overview. I think the first selectman's message to the Board of Finance covered most of this information, and there were a couple of pointers, recommendations that they submitted. I believe there are a total of 6 recommendations for us to consider as we go through this process. And I think that'll be the bulk of the work that we'll be spending over the next couple of weeks, in addition to listening and hearing from the various departments. And with that, I think I'm done with my brief overview, and maybe I could turn it over either back to you, Todd, or to the Board of Ed for them to begin walking us through their FY22 budget request.
Yeah, I think Katrina, turn it over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're pleased to join you this evening to review our budget for the 21-22 school year. It's, as you mentioned earlier, it's been an extraordinary time for our schools and our students. New Canaan has led with courage and an unwavering commitment to student health, mitigation, and safety, and all while making in-person school a high priority. New Canaan as a whole has rallied around our students and community to prioritize education during this pandemic. So we must acknowledge the entire system that has made all of these efforts possible. Dr. Lutzy and his administrative team for their tenacity and commitment to delivering in-person education, as well as a robust remote learning platform every day of the school year. Our unions continue to be strong partners, and our teachers and staff have showed up for our students in every way possible this year. Our community, our town leadership, and our boards, and all of you have lent your time and expertise and funding, important funding, critical funding to make it happen. Everyone has stepped up in a big way, and our students continue to inspire us all to keep moving forward and maintain our continued focus on excellence. This entire commitment has made a huge impact for our community and our students. Specific to the budget on the operating side this evening, I will turn that over to Dr. Lutzy and Dr. Keating to present additional details in a moment, but I'd like to highlight a few points. New Canaan's per pupil spending is now near the lowest in our DRG. While we continue to maintain excellent standings in the state and nation, our breadth of co-curricular programs in athletics, even with modifications and interruptions this year, continue to excel in offering students an important outlet to pursue their passions and interests. And we must also maintain an unrelenting focus on supporting our students' social and emotional well-being for the rest of this year and next and beyond. We are now, hard to believe, we're now entering our 3rd budget cycle impacted by COVID. As Linda shared earlier, we've had over $2 million in savings, with additional anticipated savings forecasted for this year as a result of COVID impacts. As we move forward, COVID will continue to be a part of our school mitigation strategies and expenses next year. And so we'll look to continue our work together with you to support our students as we plan ahead. Again, this year, the board has once again prioritized investment in changing school schedules to align with medical recommendations, as well as shifting our elementary schools onto a common schedule, while carefully considering these impacts and the changes in our community on schools and families. On the capital front, these sound investments that have been made over recent years provided to be critically important to our success in moving forward once, last March, once the pandemic hit. Within 2 days, the district was able to move forward, scale based on the infrastructure and the investments in technology, our leases, our networks that had been made in the prior years. And in addition, the healthy maintenance of our buildings enabled us to be prepared to make modifications to the HVAC and all the important mitigation strategies that needed to be in place to open our schools this year. So I wanted to highlight and thank again you all for the priorities that have been made in our capital budgets over the recent years. This past year, the BOE has worked collaboratively with the town's infrastructure committee to coordinate bidding for solar projects for East and South, and the district continues to effectively and efficiently manage large capital projects on time and within or under budget. I'd like to say a special thank you tonight to Todd, Michael, George, and Chris, who've spent additional time working with the board throughout this year as we work through COVID impacts, and to the entire Board of Finance for your continued partnership and support of our schools. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lutzy.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Parkham. And I want to just start by saying thank you to the members of the Board of Education, the cabinet members, the building principals, other administrators who are here on the call, certainly our town council members here that have joined us. And of course, most importantly, say hello to each of you, members of the Board of Finance, and say thank you for this opportunity to share our budget with you and to begin this dialogue together. And of course, last but not least, First Selectman Moynihan, sorry there, Kevin, right in the middle of the screen, sorry. Thank you for being here with us. Of course you would be. In this year, the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged us personally and professionally like never before. All of us are navigating uncharted waters, and our commitment to care for our students, faculty, staff, and community is faithfully serving as our true north and our unwavering guide throughout this journey. History teaches us that authentic leaders step forward when times are tough. They listen to, empathize, and assist those who are struggling. They help others to confront the difficult facts of the current reality, no matter how challenging they are. And they anchor others' beliefs that together we will succeed and build a better future. Throughout the pandemic, district and town leaders have stepped forward. They've led with yes, and they've met the moment with skill and alacrity. It's been an honor and a privilege to lead our school community through these challenging times, and I'm deeply grateful to be part of an immensely dedicated and talented team in and around the school district. We may not know what challenges tomorrow will bring, but together we know that we will successfully overcome them, whatever they are. So tonight, as we get together and begin our budget process with you, we're here to talk about a very important part of this unknown future, which is our Board of Education's budget proposal for 2021 and 22. As Katrina mentioned, this is our third budget that will be impacted by COVID, as you'll see. We are working daily to mitigate and to minimize the impact of COVID on the educational opportunity first, that we provide to our students. But from the very, very beginning in our district, we took a different approach than I think just about anybody else. And we knew right from the start that we had a choice. And our choice was to work to try to hold on to things that maybe we couldn't hold on to try to create a pale replica, perhaps, of what the students' experience would have been had COVID not existed. Or we could have worked hard to innovate and to create and to take a generative approach to the challenges that COVID presented us in order to create something new and meaningful, memorable, something that would be uniquely owned by the students, the children that are going through this experience, by their families, by their teachers and their staff, to step forward every day proudly to say, we can figure this out, we can do this, and we can make this better than anywhere else. And it's with enormous pride and humility that I come to say tonight that because of the team that you see here, because of our staff, our teachers, because of everybody that works in our school district, because of the support of our town, with the First Selectman Moynihan leading the way with the coordination with the town and the efforts that we've worked through together, your support as a Board of Finance, the town council, our parents and the community, everybody's efforts together have truly created something special for our kids, for our district, for our town. And I'm enormously, it's probably the thing that at the end of my career, whenever that's going to be, this will stand out as one of the most proud experiences of my life, because of the things that we have accomplished for each other and mostly on behalf of the children that we care for every day. So I just wanted to start just by saying thank you and really calling just to the fore the vital importance of our work and how grateful we are as professionals and just as human beings to be doing this work together. You know, one of our district ethics, maybe the strongest, is that we do believe that what we do in our schools is the most important work on the planet every single day. Educating children, educating the next generation of the world, so to speak. There are lots of cliches around they'll take care of us one day. I'm not going to go down that road, but it's because it's more inspiring than that, right? The work we do is the most important work on the planet, full stop. And the way that we've responded to these challenges, I think, has really embodied those words and shown the vital importance of what we do in our schools. So tonight we're here to talk about our budget together. Through the conversations that we've had with members of the Board of Finance in advance, through our resources committee, we're going to take a different approach. And I think hopefully a more successful one for all of us here. Certainly, no matter how comfortable your slippers may be tonight, you don't want to sit and listen to us speak for hours on end. So what we're thinking we'll do is avoid the PowerPoint deck, not go through slide after slide and speak to you, but really hope to open this up as a dialogue together. We'll start with our operating budget. I'll have a couple of exhibits that we put up here and there on the screen just to maybe set the stage or to walk through some numbers and some thinking and some ideas. We'll go into the questions and some answers around the operating budget with an understanding that we're here for you. We want this to be time well spent for the Board of Finance. So we want to do this together. So you're welcome as I'm going through this to stop, to ask clarifying questions. And between myself, Dr. Keating, Dr. Parenti, Ms. Bianca, Mr. Tesber, Board of Education members, we will do our best to give you as thorough an answer as possible. And if there's anything that we need to go back, research, and get back to you about, we'll do that as well. Tonight we're really here to share, to listen, to learn together. And we truly are grateful for the opportunity to have this dialogue. So with that, I'm going to jump right in. And I think this is going to surprise you a little bit. And I'll say why in a moment. Is that clear?
Yes.
Thumbs up? Yes, thank you. I think the reason why I think it's going to surprise you a little is we're typically a good hour in before I show you any numbers. And instead of building suspense tonight, I thought we'd get right into it, as we said. So these numbers, this just came out recently. And again, this is just a little background information. And Ms. Parkhill mentioned this briefly in the overview, but I thought we just dive a little deeper into it. Each year, the state of Connecticut develops what they call the net current expenditures per pupil. And you've seen this exhibit yearly for the last couple of years. And if you go back the last couple of years, you'll see a little bit of a trend where we were very proud to be in the middle of the pack with our net current expenditure per pupil. But just as we've gone through the last couple of years, we've continued to find efficiencies to run our operation very well. Todd, I believe, and agree with what you said in the beginning, which is the budget and the operation being tightly managed. This exhibit simply shows how we compare after normalizing the data at the state level, how we compare against our reference group. And we put Greenwich in there as well, because we think that's another comparable group, although they're in DERG B, which is Demographic Reference Group B, but we put them in there. So you see out of the 10 towns that are involved, we wound up coming in 8th, and our per pupil last year for 1920 was actually below the average of our reference group. And you could even go one step further. Reading and Easton, of course, are sort of ER9 combined into one, along with Joe Barlow High School. So those are elementary districts. So if you were to combine them, they would be above our New Canaan and Ridgefield, New Canaan's average. So we would actually be, there'd only be one district that spends less per pupil in our reference group. Now, granted, DERG A is the highest performing demographic reference group, certainly in the state. for the most part. And being in Lower Fairfield County, things are a little more expensive. So we also wanted to just take a quick look to see where does it look like on a statewide level? And if you'll just bear with me. Is that clear for you?
Yes.
Thanks, Tucker. So when we looked across the state, we were a little surprised to see as well that where we may have been 30 or 32 in a few years past here in 1920, we've again managed the expenses, I would say, quite well in order to keep our per pupil competitive. So statewide, we would rank 38th in our expenditure per pupil. Again, these are controlled, so there are things that are removed out of the number and balance out. So it's not something we could just look at a budget and compare. The state uses the audit to pull these things together. And to be fair, some of the districts at the very top certainly have very small enrollments. So those fixed costs that they deal with on a regular basis certainly drive up the per pupil costs. But that's not all of them, though. You know, as you'll see, there's some districts that are certainly several thousand students. And so New Canaan is here highlighted at 38. And you see some of our DERG comparisons, Darien at 35. If you jump up here a bit, Westport at 22, Weston at 17, you know, and others in our reference group. But I think, again, I just wanted to start there to show as our budget management, the work that we've been doing, the efficiencies that we've been finding, and the way that we have been, managing this together, the administration, the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance, Town Council, others, is yielding good results. So that's the sort of the cost. Of course, what I would typically do is go into great detail about the outcomes and the wonderful results our students have been having on the stage, on the courts, on the field, in the classroom, and all those things. But again, this is a disrupted year, and it's a different kind of experience for all of us. So I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is say that our students are thriving in our schools, and just share that we have been fully in session, all of our students in grades pre-K through 8, since late September, early October. We have not, knock on wood, I think everyone can knock on wood, we've not had to close a building because of COVID and those issues. We are running our high school in a different model than just about anybody else. We're using a model called a hybrid plus, which instead of splitting your student body in half and having half come in while the other half stay home, we've split them into fourths, and we have 3/4 of them come in. So instead of being in 50%, we're in at 75% capacity. And what we're able to do is students now can attend in person 6 out of every 8 days on an 8-day cycle. And over the course of those 6 days, all of our students get to see their peers. They get to see everybody else in their class. Because what we saw was that the traditional hybrid that most schools were operating in became a grind for kids. There was no novelty in their day. They would come in, they'd see the same group of kids going to the same classes. It really was difficult. And so we were losing some kids. They started to self-select into remote learning. And so we said, we've got to find a better way to do this. We put our heads together and came up with a plan that honors and recognizes the importance of novelty and experience for our kids in their learning. So they're coming in, they're seeing others, they're building the class spirit for each of our classes and having a more traditional high school experience. Now, it's not to say that some of our traditions are going to hold this year. We had to make some changes last year, of course, and we're going to have to make some changes again this year, but we'll take that one step at a time, knowing that we continue to focus on doing the very, very best that we can for all of our kids. So we're very proud of that, very grateful for the incredible work of all of our personnel, both certified and non-certified, our school counselors, our psychologists, our sociologists, others, the school climate work that we've been doing, this building of skills and emotional intelligence, all of those things have helped us to have a successful experience here throughout the pandemic. And so with that, I will transition into the actual budget document itself. And as I do, I want to share my thanks. Let me do this. And Tucker, I'm going to rely on you again. Is that clear?
It is.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to share my thanks with Dr. Keating, with Ms. Haberman, with their staff, because again, this is another way that we rise to the challenge, right? We know that we're not going to be in a room together handing out binders. And I know you're all very disappointed about that. But we said, how do we do this better, right? Because the binders, they take so long to put together, and we make one change and then we have to hand out new pages, and it didn't make sense. So we knew that wasn't going to work. So instead, Joanne, Tracy, and their department created an interactive PDF document of the entire budget, where they actually created a table of contents and hyperlinked. Yep, exactly. Yep, you can print it. Todd, let me know if you need a binder. We can tab it for you. But they created the document and created the hyperlinks right here in the table of contents, where you can literally jump through to access that. And it's available for everyone right on our website. If you just go to ncps-k12.org, and you can click to the Board of Education's page, go right to the budget. Anyone can download it and go through it. And we do have some updates as we go through the process, and we're able to put them right online. And when we do that, we send a quick email out to the Board of Finance so that you're aware as well. So you can go through and access it that way. So we hope that has been helpful for everybody. We know it's been great for us. And again, makes sense in this world. I don't see us going back to distributing binders to anyone who doesn't request them, but you can always request them, and we're glad to do it because we still do paper well too. Of course, the members of the Board of Education, everyone involved with the budget and with the district, has really been present, engaged, and contributing to helping us to succeed. The document itself, we have some helpful hints for those that may need them. There's an introduction here from me with an overview. We go right into the enrollment projections. There was a question or two about that, and we'll get to them in a little bit. Glad to have that discussion. We have enrollment projections that go into a staffing plan that, and as you know, in our budget, salary and benefits accounts for the majority of our budget, close to 80%, which is common in school districts like ours, because we are a people business working with people. But what I'm going to now is we're going to stop on page 22. And if you have that locally on your screen, you're welcome to follow along there. I'm going to use this as an opportunity just to provide a high-level overview. And I'm going to ask for Dr. Keating's assistance as I get into some specifics. And then we're glad to go into anything more specific than this as we go. As you know, one of my favorite sections of our budget book is the why the budget change section. I fondly call them crib notes. So we can certainly go into that section, have any conversation, or jump right over to the Q&A after that if you'd like. And again, we want to do what's best and most helpful for you. But let me start with this high-level overview. And I'm going to start by sharing a change in approach just a little bit here. In years past, you've heard me talk a little bit about projections and how we spend an awful lot of time reforecasting the budget in order to project where we believe each line is going to end. Oh, Penny, if you can go on mute, please. Thanks. Okay. So we would talk about projected we reforecast in order to project where we think each line will end at the conclusion of the school year. It helps us in our budget management. It helps us in our planning forward. It's when you think about, here we are in February talking about the budget for 21-22. When you do that reforecast closer, when you're in the midst of budget management, it can be more accurate. This is a different kind of year. Of course, we're only now beginning our basketball season. Our fall sports season was abbreviated. We didn't have our football team. We have not had the opportunities in the visual and performing arts that we typically have. There's lots of things that have either we've not been able to offer or we've had to try to recreate in different ways. So that leads, of course, to different budget management. And we are working through all of those things. And Dr. Keating, Ms. Haberman, and their team, as they did the reforecast, did it true to how we are spending the money and where we anticipate being as we go through the year, because it's an important budget management tool. However, thinking about developing next year's budget and looking at and having a meaningful conversation about it, we are actually asking, we're going to go through this exhibit that looks at a budget to budget comparison instead of a projection to budget comparison, because doing otherwise would make it appear that there's we're increasing the budget in order to only restore programs that existed pre-COVID. So, we're not leaving the money in the projection for the transportation, let's say, for our football team next year. We didn't need it this year, so we take it out, right? So, but if we compare against that projection, it looks like that's additive, and it's not. So we want to be true. So again, I'm glad to take any questions on that, but that's the approach. So on line 1, you see the adopted budget last year for this year for 21-22 is the 90,880,629. This budget represented an overall slight decrease year to year in our budget. And as we know, as you'll recall, there was funding for school start times. There also was an opportunity for savings in the internal services fund that was used to leverage to help to bring that budget down. So building off of that 90,880,000, there are really 4 main drivers to this budget. And we're glad to pick any one of those apart and go into any more detail. But the 4 drivers are lines 2 through 5. The first is COVID expenses. And I've been speaking with colleagues with the Department of Public Health, with the State Department of Education, speaking with folks like Dr. Sosa, Dr. Carter, others at the DPH that are very involved and incredibly helpful for districts to help us to navigate all this about sort of what should we anticipate next year. And the feedback has been to anticipate anywhere from a quarter to a half of a year of need for expense for further COVID mitigation and COVID work. So what we've built in here is half of the year, so 5 months or so. This will be 5 months of school because we're a 10-month operation, but so 6 months, a half of the year for additional expenses. And we're glad to go into detail on what those are specifically, if you like. But that totals up to about 900,000. As you can see, that is 1% of a budget increase, right? If we're at 90,880,000, 909,000 would be 1%. The other is the second big driver is the Internal Services Fund contribution, and Dr. Keating will go into a little more detail about that. And there's more complexity there as well, right? We saved money last year when everything was shut down because people were not accessing healthcare. They weren't going out and doing things that could lead to them being injured to needing healthcare. They weren't going to the doctors or the hospital. So Dr. Keating will get into some specifics, but we've got to take a different look at that this year. Ms. Parkhill mentioned the school start and end time change. We do continue to believe that we can create a better schedule for all of our kids, by adjusting, aligning the start times, adjusting the school start and end times across the board, we can create a healthier system. And we continue to learn that the system itself does have an impact on the health of those within the system. For instance, is when we are remote at the high school. The high school doesn't start at 7:30 when we're remote. This high school starts at 8 o'clock because that extra half hour makes a big difference for kids. We're doing some other things like shifting the schedule, looking to create what students call sleep-ins. We used to call them study halls, but they don't come and they don't study. They stay home and they stay asleep. So we will call them sleep-ins. But we've done some other things to continue. We need to be holistic in this approach because it's not really, the goal isn't to change our school start times. The goal is to identify and implement the ways that we can create a healthy system for our kids so that as they go through the educational experience, they are ready to learn. We are contributing to their physical, mental, academic, intellectual health, and that it helps them manage stress. It gives them the resilience, other pieces. Glad to get into more detail about that if you like. But then the fourth is sort of the bucket of other changes. So without those three drivers, COVID expenses, the internal services fund contribution, start and end time, we're looking at a $1.7 million change. Okay. And if you remove those three and only just look at that, that would be an overall change of 1.92%. Or if you take out the internal services fund so that to bring the base down because we're not looking at it on either side, then you're looking at about 2.15, which as Linda mentioned earlier, it's been a target, I know, for the town, for boards to look at around a 2%. It's tricky, when you're 80% is salary and benefits in your budget, and the GWI places can be in some of our bargaining units can be different depending upon negotiations. So there's other savings we find. So if you go, line 8, you'll see that totals up to the 95.4 million. Which is the Board of Education's request in front of you. The other changes, that's a big bucket, right? There's over 800 line items, everything else that's involved. You're really looking at salary and step increases at 2 million. And then everything else, again, this is not the internal services fund, but everything else is actually netting down 265,000 and bringing that number down. And you'll see that some of the drivers in the salary step increases include COVID-related items. Some districts they hired teachers in order to put some mitigation strategies in place. We took a slightly different approach and hired certified substitutes to do that. So things like that. There was no one formula that was put out in order to sort of learn to run schools with COVID. The only way to know if you're doing it right, in my opinion, is, are your schools safe? Are they open? Are kids learning? And are they in school? So I think the path we've chosen has been successful so far, thanks to everybody's hard work, as we said. But the top here, as we go through just the first and second part with the other changes, sort of those big drivers in the budget. And Dr. Keating, if you would like to take it from there, just for walk us through the internal services changes.
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone, and very thankful to be sitting in this meeting and being able to have this conversation. If I may, before we move down to the internal services fund, I would like to say that this budget year has been interesting, to say the least, and of course, moving forward to next year, similarly. So we had to present what we feel are going to be our expenses next year. And we do feel that there are opportunities to address them creatively as we move forward through the process. And one of those areas is in the COVID expense category. If you take a look at page 102, you'll have a sense of where we're going to be anticipate spending money for the first half of next school year. And that's where we feel the mitigation strategies would then start to drop off. Some good news, since we presented this to the Board of Education, is that ESSER 2, it's one of the 2 grants that have come out from the federal government. The ESSER 1, we've already received. ESSER 2 actually was a bigger amount of money for New Canaan. We're going to be receiving $442,000. And so a portion of the 909 can be offset by the funds that are coming in from ESSER 2. There are some restrictions on that grant, but it was certainly good news. It's much more than we had anticipated or actually received in the first round. Our first round was around 100,000. So we're, again, very grateful for that. So that's one solution, and perhaps to move the balance of the need into a non-lapsing account, as we did this year, could be a way to avoid some operating expense building into our base. If you move down into the internal services fund, it certainly has been volatile over the last year, almost year. Last year, we had projected our expenditures to be $12.7 million in claims for the full year. they came in closer to 10.5, which is an all-time low for the last decade, I believe. That actually put $2.2 million more into the fund balance than we had projected. And as you recall, last year, we projected using 2.1 million of fund balance that had been existing the prior June 30th, and then changing the funding to a 40-60 rather than a 60-40, which was another $500,000 savings. So the formula you're going to be looking at now down below, starting on line 12, it really starts with where the contributions were for this current fiscal year at $9,758,000. In order to get down to the new base, we have to consider the fact that we did have this balance in addition to what we had projected at year end 7/1/2020. So you have to kind of take that out as a funding need because it's going to be available. From there, you have to go in and take a look at lower revenues as a result of COVID. And we have been impacted by that. And Brian, if you could enlarge the screen just a little bit, I would appreciate it. I'm visually impaired, but. Okay, thank you. So you can take a look at the budget page 105, but the food service contributions, we had anticipated putting in 200,000 from food services into this fund. At the end of last year, the lack of service for the last 3+ months generated over a $400,000 loss in that fund. And we do expect something very similar for this year. So the fund itself has gone down from a little over $1 million, less 800,000. So we're going to have to really be very cautious with how we manage that fund. So we are not going to be transferring that 200,000 as it stands right now for this current year. We'll reassess in the years to come as we build that balance back up. On page, the budget page 105, you'll also see that in the current year, we expect our expenses to come in $551,000 below. And that really is a combination of the fact that we do think our claims are going to be hitting the target, if not a slightly over, of 13.2 million. But we have a high claimant right now in the mix that is going to generate 500,000 in reimbursement from stop loss. So that's the primary reason why we do believe we're going to have a reduction in expense in the fund. So from that point, we go down to our budget analysis that was done by our consultant. So if you just look at the actuarial experience of 1.22, it's going to add $161,000 to expense. This year, there's a new adjustment, something that we haven't experienced in the past, and it's called the COVID adjustment. And it's been estimated at 9.3%. And this is the number that we have been, I wouldn't say struggling, but trying to really wrap our minds around in terms of how do we really quantify this? As you know, actuarials really look at history and then commitments for the future. And this is an unknown. So it's a $1.2 million increase in our anticipated claims. That is again, a question, something that we have to really experience before we have confidence in whether or not it's going to materialize. And then you move down to the fact that our plan year starts on September 1st through August 31st, rather than a July 1st through June 30th year. And so it means that we just trend out 2 months more than you generally would. And so that's going up a few $1 million. Our stop loss insurance, we do expect it to go up by some amount. We've been talking with the town's consultant, and there is agreement on that. The amount we won't know until sometime in June, when the stop loss insurance is finally bid out and rewritten with whoever the carrier is going to be at that time. And then other, which is everything else that goes into balancing out the fund. So that's kind of how it works. We've been presenting our fund this way for the last 5-6 years. What we would say about this fund is that we've always covered our maximum risk in the fund. And so we've always used calculations from our consultants to really drill down as to what the right number could be. But because we don't write our stop loss insurance in the aggregate until late May, early June, we really are not relying on the final exact number. And one of the things that we've been talking about and we shared with some members of the Board of Finance a few weeks ago is that, we might want to take a look at really holding off on setting the contributions, the full contributions, I should say, to the Internal Services Fund until we know what our maximum risk corridor is, and then fund that up through a reserve. And that would help us hold back on funding the 1.2 million on the COVID expense. It would be probably close to that number that we would be able to hold back until we have the experience. This current year, our claims, like I said, are tracking right on target to the budget, the projection that we had last year at budget time. However, in January, our claims actually were the lowest of the 7 months that we've had so far since July 1st at 800,000. And yet the first week of February was one of the largest 1 week totals we've had. So it's very volatile at this time. And it's difficult to say what the numbers are going to end up with at the end of the day. But I think it would be helpful if the town was in full agreement to look at a different way of funding this fund, at least for this current year, moving forward.
Yeah, well,
Any
to answer
questions?
that, I think, I don't really want to go into a deep dive on it right now, but we have, I think, a really exciting proposal in mind to consolidate the funds and the health expenses across the town and the Board of Ed, and help us reduce the amount we fund into the reserve fund, and to look at this completely differently, actually. So I think we should be forecasting every 6 months, not every 12 or 20. I think I think you would agree. And I think as you've seen over the last 5 or 6 years, we've over forecasted our healthcare over $1 million every year. So we're very conservative in how we forecast, and we're very conservative with the reserve fund that we hold, which as a town is over $8 million, which is insane for $19 million combined expense. So yeah, we're all in on looking this over completely and looking for some savings and cost avoidance that will be fantastic for you and for the town and not impact a single student. So that's a real win-win on the table. So I sent that over to Katrina, and then I think what we ought to do is over the next couple of weeks hammer it out.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to sit down. There's some factors that we all need to be aware of as we move forward that are process oriented, but certainly could impact this and the proposal. But, we have to be open and put our thoughts on the table and have an open and honest conversation about it.
Excellent. That'd be great.
One of the real advantages of funding to the attachment point is that if that's where your aggregate stop loss begins for that corridor, then you're budgeting right to that number. So you don't, the issue around sort of budgeting higher than the attachment point or anything else, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So then it kind of tightens up that process. It's a timing issue as much as anything, as Dr. Keating said, right? It's we won't get that till late May or June, and our budget needs to be wrapped up with a bow on it in April. So some work and partnership we can certainly make refine the process, make it work better.
Yeah, we don't vote on this until May, so we can finalize it in May. But I agree with that idea of working together to hammer that out. Just one thing on this page, and again, I don't know what else you had left for your overview, but you showed a graph a minute ago, and it had the average cost per student. Now this is $95 million, and you flashed over the projected headcount, but I think it was 4080. That would jump us to over $23,000 per student. And that would put us in the top 10 or 15 in the state. Now, those people won't be standing still either, right? Things are changing, but that's a 10%, overall increase per student. Is that what you're proposing?
Well, so Dr. Keating might know more about exactly the specifics, but that number is not this number, right? In that what the state does through the audit is they control out different factors. Certain things may go to maybe attributed elsewhere. And so they get to that number by controlling for those same variables across different districts. So it's really not a one-to-one comparison like that.
Okay.
Joanne, you're welcome to jump in if there's more to it, but if
No,
I did a good job, it just means I'm paying attention.
You're correct. I mean, there are different variables that go into the calculation. So it's not a straightforward number like this.
Right. Okay. So what I thought that if it works for you, and again, we're certainly here to serve, I thought we could jump into the questions. I know the Board of Finance has taken a look at the budget itself and generated a few questions that were grouped. So I think they could lead to some discussion for us as well, if that works for everybody.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I will say that the presentation that you did and the document that you've created, it was fantastic. And as you saw from the questions, this board is on paragraph 3 on page 63 and page 114. So everybody read it. So anyway, you got the questions in advance just so we can have a great dialogue. Dive into it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's jump right in there. Let's see. Close this. Okay, Tucker, how's it look? All right, thank you. So we are grateful. You know, again, this is another of I think positive outcomes from our meeting earlier with a couple of members from the Board of Finance. We had the conversation, how can we make the most of the time that we have? And it was, instead of us sort of trying to guess and anticipate, it was get us some questions now instead of like that as a round 2, right? There may be more questions that come, but it's a great way for us to go right in. So what I'll do, if it's all right, is sort of summarize and kind of move through. I'm not going to read this to you. Certainly, I'll send it out to you as soon as we're done here. But I do, you know, one of the questions was about buses and the bus contract and the costs and sort of how that it is a significant driver, as you know, in our budget. The question was asked about the difference between last year's proposal and this. And if you're buying a bus, don't you have to pay for a bus? And actually, we don't buy the buses. We're buying the service through DATCO. So by doing it as a mid-year implementation, would wind up being about 50% of the cost that we had brought forward, about $54,000 per bus, instead of about the 108 or so that we had budgeted in the past. Where it's not just the bus, of course, it's the driver and everything else that goes with it. But that's why the number would be half. And then, of course, the anticipation would be that in the 22-23 budget, it would be fully funded because you wouldn't do it only half the year. You know, it's kind of an all or nothing thing at that point. The contract that we're in with DATCO, we've been with DATCO for some time. And there is, that contract is in next year will be its last year that we're in that contract with DATCO. Over the course of that contract, we transitioned to all propane buses. We put in a propane filling station, and we've had great success with the buses, to be honest. The propane itself, one of the great things, many positive benefits to it. One of them is it starts down to, I don't know, I think it's negative 40-degree temperature because the propane itself is under pressure. So in the past, there were times when we had cold, you know, a block of cold weather where people would leave the buses running overnight, or they wouldn't be sure if they'd start in the morning, and there'd be delays and problems. With the propane, it starts right up. So that's just another, being that we are in February in the midst of winter, and although not too cold, it was a challenging weather day today. So those buses are performing well for a number of reasons, that being one of them. Also saving some money. You know, they are more efficient. Propane's less expensive, things like that. There was a question about would we be able to get into like a hybrid type of bus. And we certainly will look at that if we do move forward and need to go with the additional buses. But we do currently we've built an infrastructure around the propane. And we'd have to look to see if we're doing a hybrid, are they plug-in hybrids? What's that power look like? How do you plug them in? You know, sort of getting that whole system. Because again, we're talking about a scale of, you know, 40 to 45 buses or so, depending upon, you know, the final numbers. So we certainly could look at what that might take, but it may take more than it's worth it in the end, knowing that the propane is you know, serving us well. This question always comes up that people say every time they look at a bus, it looks empty. Why are we paying for all these empty buses driving around the roads? We can tell you and assure you they're not. They're certainly not empty. But this year, they are running lighter than they typically do because of the pandemic. If you'll remember, all the way back in the summertime, people were talking about not taking the bus because you're in a confined space. And we've seen our ridership lower this year than it has been in the past. In part, I think for that reason, probably mostly for that reason. We anticipate that as we get post-pandemic and things sort of restore back, that the ridership would pick back up. You know, it's great that our community and parents and families are willing to drive right now. But I think that in time, the ridership will increase back to where it was, you know, pre-pandemic, whatever that's going to be. So the buses themselves, you know, a bus has to be as large as its largest run. So the runs that use the most buses generally are the middle school, that middle tier uses quite, because many of the middle school kids are riding the bus. But then you use those same buses and you spread them out to be most efficient in between your other runs. You wouldn't sideline buses in order to fill the ones that are running. You get them all out there so that you can shorten the runs and bring the kids in, you know, as smoothly and quickly as possible. Excuse me, and try to tighten the time between your starts and your ends for the schools. So the contract with DATCO itself, as I said, next year is the last year. And there's an approach that we've taken in the past that works, which is really we start looking at the market to see if other districts are going out to bid. What are those bid numbers coming in at? You know, what does that look like? And then we look to make an informed decision about where is the best savings, what's the best approach? Is it to bid? Is it to renegotiate? You know, how do we best move this forward? And of course, we work with the Resources Committee of the Board of Ed and, you know, and others to work through the cost benefit analysis on that. Question about the special education vehicles. We're actually using those vehicles similar to how we have in the past. We have our special education students, some of them have internships and vocational experiences and others. The programs they go to generally have been open and they need to be, right? So they're working really, really hard to be open. So as the buses are running, and of course we use some of them right here in district for students that are in our launch program, for some students in our preschool program, you know, and others. So as we've been open, we've needed them. We did carve out and sort of organize things in order to use one of our drivers to help out with the testing, the first selectman mentioned in the beginning. And I think that's working well. And it's a good partnership that Monday through Saturday, one of our drivers is actually, you know, getting the tests over to the lab so we can get it there on time and save money, because that is a significant cost when you actually work with an external partner doing this work. So the reason for the special education wheelchair van in the budget, we have two. This would add a third. It's because we would need one for each of the elementary schools because we have a child in each school that would need to be transported. And but when we're aligning those 3 elementary schools, we would need one van per. Of course, we don't only use it for that. We also use it as a regular van when we don't need to transport someone with those needs. Let's see. Okay, a couple last things, and then I'll pause on the transportation. And of course, Dr. Keating, you're welcome to fill in anywhere or share anything else. But the restore is that, right? We didn't run the buses. We didn't have a football program. We haven't had others. So the money is down in the projection. So this restores it back up. Well, actually, I think it's in savings on the transportation. But as you know, last year was very disrupted. So one of the things that we negotiated with DATCO was a flat year-to-year budget this year, which led to some savings. I think the number's a little bit later. The 6 about a charter, then having buses for our activities is a challenge. In a good year, getting enough buses to transport our kids where they need to go for athletics and other things. We've got so many students that are involved in so many different programs. So that plus the fact that you can't put the same number of kids on a bus now as you used to. You know, you have to skip seats, you have to spread out, you have to leave windows down. You know, there's a whole COVID mitigation approach we have to take with buses. Part of that is having an additional bus in order to spread the kids out, in order to keep our programs running. So it is necessary in the short term, and we are continuing to look for other possible ways to approach that challenge. And then the stipend piece, which is transportation, but is certainly connected. Fewer programs, fewer coaches that we didn't pay. It looks like an increase, but it's a 1.5 GWI increase on the overall costs year to year. But it looks like a larger jump because of, again, comparing against projected instead of against budgeted. So it's just because we didn't have those coaches and those programs running. Joanne, if there's anything else or any other details.
Good.
Let me just ask before we jump, are there any follow-up questions from the board on any of those items? Can you see the gallery?
I can. Do you want? I'm glad to, Judy. If you. Oh, I can't hear you though, Judy. Judy, we can't hear you. Sorry. Maybe I might be able to do it.
No. Judy, you have to unmute.
Is that?
There you go.
Okay,
There you go.
good. When I asked in the fall about the reimbursement for all of the expenses extra and incurred for any of the programs through the grants, is that included in the 100,000 received and or the 442,000 grant, or is that a separate allocation? Or was that never agreed to? About the contracts and whether or not we had to pay out, even if the buses weren't running, and any additional costs if we had to add extra buses, all of that?
So the bus contract last year, you mean last year when?
No, this
when we
is
closed after
when,
March, or for this year?
no, this is when we were more into remote. This is I asked it, at least 6 months ago about the expenses that were incurred because we had buses that weren't running.
Mhm.
And the extra expenses that the state was supposed to let us know, that's what you said. Was that received in any of these numbers, or is there no reimbursement whatsoever?
Yeah, the state was looking at some kind of getting involved with the transportation contracts. I think
That's right, yeah.
due to the variability of approaches that occurred across and the different companies that were involved, that it didn't result in anything that was beneficial to districts. Unfortunately, districts were left on their own. So we've been working very closely with DATCO. Of course, we didn't pay for any of the other transportation outside of the contract. We did wind up saving money, over the course of the year from what we had budgeted. That was a part of the savings that was turned back. We made good on our contract, but didn't have any of the extras, right? None of the field trips or clubs or sports or anything else. And so, we saved with that piece of it. I know there is some legislation being proposed about the school lunch program, I believe, because many districts are down in their revenue in the lunch program, because either by being remote or even being in hybrid. And I think that I know that I saw some proposed legislation around that's meant to help districts. I've not seen anything since that conversation we had back. And I remember exactly back in the spring. It never materialized.
Never materialized. All right.
Yeah.
Wow. I thought maybe.
Well, it's good to be an optimist.
Well,
Hi, this is Victor Alvarez. I have a question about the athletic transportation. So if you are bringing it back up to 267,000, I'm assuming that you're assuming that in fiscal year 2022, we just go back to normal and we keep playing at the other towns at the same level that we did back in 2019 before the pandemic. And then when I look at the 2019 number, I see that we spent 255,000 on athletic transportation. So the 2022 proposed number is a 4.7% increase over the 2019 number. So that's why it strikes me as high. So my question is, do you think that in fiscal year 2022, we're just going to go right back to normal? Is that what you're assuming?
We are, Dr. Keating, I believe that's the increase in the contract over the course of the 2 years.
It is. So we are expecting to go back to normal with athletics for the entire school year next year. So that's the basis of how the budget was built. And there's good reason to think that it will. I mean, there's a lot of mitigation strategies that have been put in place, and we are certainly hopeful for our students that it will. The contract does increase year over year, so the cumulative effect of that is included in the calculation. But also from year to year, we do have extended seasons from some of our very excellent teams that we have. So it really depends on, you know, how many teams go to state championships, for example, and that kind of thing. And so when our athletic director, Jay Egan, puts this together, he does put an allowance of, I believe, $10,000 in his budget in anticipation that some of our teams, which they usually do, will go to state championships.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? You'll need to speak up. We can't really get the whole gallery view very easily. So,
Dr. Keating, could you speak to the school lunch program?
Sure. So the first question, so as I mentioned earlier, our school lunch program has taken a significant hit on COVID. Last year, for the last 3+ months, we did not operate, and we had a payroll that we were processing through. So our food prices and our food spend and our non-salary spend really is disproportionate with what it would be historically. We are looking at the program resuming close to normal next year. So it is our intention to operate a full service program for all in school. Our high school generally does carry, not carry completely, but is our biggest money maker in the district. We have most of our kids we serve. We have a high participation rate there. We do at Saks and the other schools as well, but the high school just, the menu is diverse and the students really take advantage of the program. This year with being 50-50 in most of the school year so far, and of course the first month being you know, more remote than in, it's really taken an impact on the program. Our sales are normally around $2.2 million. This year, we're expecting them to be down below, significantly below that, about 25%. We did our best. Tracy actually developed this budget with the assistance of all of her documents and everything that she has in terms of historical information to look at the best possible projection for the program. With that said, it really is going to depend on how quickly we can transition to full in next year as to whether or not this program is going to rebound next year, as we hope it will.
And the school lunch program is towards the end of the budget document, I believe, but is broken out, right, with a balance sheet.
Yeah.
Projections. Yeah.
And we were doing so well in this program prior to all of this. We were really turning over around $250,000 a year in profit. And that's why we were hopeful that we would be able to contribute that amount to the Internal Services Fund.
Okay, I'll keep going. Very quickly, there was questions about the incremental $25,000 for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative. You know, without, again, reading to you here, it is a goal for the Board of Education to work on, to expand and to increase the focus on educational diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the district. The net first steps in this for the Board of Ed are to develop a belief statement with long and short-term goals to highlight some of the existing programs that are occurring and to provide professional learning for staff and educational opportunities for the community. So to initiate that process, that $25,000 is in the budget for next year. This is something that we're looking to begin this year, but you know, this is a long-term goal that we're going to be looking at. So it's a multi-year goal, of course, and the $25,000 is meant to help continue the efforts that we begin this year and to continue to expand. Okay, I'll loop back to capital after we go through operating, if that's all right. There's a couple of questions on capital, but we can talk to the enrollment very quickly. The question about enrollment flat or down, and there's also another question a little bit later that I'll just sort of roll in here about what's going on with enrollment, and that's that's the $1 million question or multi-million-dollar question, I think, for every district everywhere with COVID, what's going to happen with enrollment. We've continued to see in-migration in a pattern that we haven't experienced before, meaning that typically they come in groups. So we begin the new calendar year, we might have an in-migration of a number of students that enroll, and then it's pretty quiet. And then we transition to looking at kindergarten for the next year and doing that work. But what's happened this year is a couple of students, a family or so per week have been coming and enrolling, and they don't want to wait to get started. They want to start the moment they arrive. Sometimes they're coming from districts that have been on remote learning only, and they're eager to get back into a classroom with other children. Other times they've heard about what we're doing and they want to be a part of it. So that pattern is different for us, and we're watching it to see what it's going to result in. I don't want to say we think it's going to be higher, we think it's going to be lower. That's the challenge of COVID, right? You just don't know. So we're pegging our budget to our enrollment projections as they were developed in October, thinking that that's what we've done in the past. We're going to follow that process, and if we have to mid-course correct, we will. But we don't want to create a set of assumptions that we later on find are faulty. So one way or the other. So we think that's the best approach to use at this point. We did have to make some quick decisions over the summer as we were looking at our staffing distribution and our class sizes. As you know, we spent a lot of time talking about social distancing, and is 3 feet okay? Is 6 feet okay? We created our cohorts with our kids so that we could mitigate the spread if a positive case arises. Even just today, almost every day, we're working through a case here or there and trying to identify close contacts and do we have to quarantine some students or a cohort or a group. So as we looked at all this, as we developed our plans, we recognized that the plan we had to reduce our 7th grade team wasn't going to work. Those class sizes were just going to be too big, and it created a super team, which meant that students would be commingling with other students from a different team, and it didn't work for the cohort model. So we had to restore the 7th grade team. We had to make some other decisions, a lot of them at Saks, because the teaming model and the way that it works, when you have a complete team, you have a complete cohort. When you're crossing teams, you're now you're losing the cohorting model. A quick for instance is a couple of months ago, we had to quarantine one of our grade level teams, which was about 80 students. And they were quarantined for a period of 2 weeks and then came back and everything worked out fine. Had we not had that cohort, we may have had to consider closing the building. So having this in place and having those tight cohorts enables us to be responsive, to make those decisions and to keep our operation running. Some districts have decided to remain in hybrid. Others have decided to bring students in with these cohorts with an understanding that if we have to quarantine a cohort, we will. And that's the model we have. And I think it's been very successful, but it does take some staffing. So as you see at the middle school, we had to add 3.8, so 0.8 at the high school, special education, world language, some restorations and others, which was a net FTE increase of 5.75. And that is, let's see, our increase, and there no administrative increase. That is, those are classroom teachers, right? Those are folks that are in the buildings. We didn't increase the administration. The retirements is another piece that was, again, if you had told me last year that we'd have 30 staff members leaving, I would have found it hard to believe. But when we look all in, that's our number. That's not teachers only, of course, that's staff. And those are staff who had comorbidities or just decided that it was time for them to go. So the anticipated savings, we saved more than we anticipated. What that means going forward, of course, is if you have a wave, then it's likely to be more of a trickle for the next couple of years. Folks that were on the cusp may have decided to go. And it did drop our historical savings given the replacement costs and other things. So typically when we budget this, and we've done this with the Board of Finance for years, we talk about about $36,000 per certified staff member for turnover savings in the salary. This, what we've seen here is, you see the numbers are 24.5 or so instead, bringing things down. So I think that we get to realize the savings now, but we have to be cautious in budgeting forward. This is not a typical number for us in retirements as we look at it. So the last piece, and I'll pause again, glad to chat more, the 3-year budget projection. It's we're working on it, and we'll get it to the Board of Education Resources Committee, and we'll get it to you. We are committing to absolutely doing that. It's almost a shame that budget season happens in the wintertime when we've got all those challenges on top of everything else, on top of everything. So, but we are committed to doing that, and we will do that, and we'll get it to you.
You mean during the winter season, during a pandemic?
Yeah,
Understand.
Yeah, there was a moment where I sort of started thinking about all of those things. Yeah. I know you do, and we're grateful that you do. Thank you. Any questions on any of that, or I'll just kind of keep bouncing down? I'll speed up a little bit too. I apologize.
Are there any questions? That was actually a very important discussion on staff FTEs. I don't know if there are any other follow-ups. That was
sure.
Can I just ask one question related to the new families moving in? One of the things that I'm seeing as a realtor is that some of the people moving in have said, oh, we've already paid for the year for their private school, wherever they're coming from. Are you seeing, I just wonder if you have any sort of data on whether people have moved to town who maybe still have their kids in remote learning from their prior private school and haven't quite been absorbed yet into our system. So, likely they'll be in next year, but we just don't know that yet. Do you have any, have you heard that?
That certainly may be the case. We wouldn't necessarily hear from them right away if that's the case, because we don't hear from them until they're ready to enroll. I would encourage them to attend in person. I consider that a sunk cost and show up on the doorstep and be ready to go in person in our classrooms, because the remote program might be good, but I think students should be together learning in their classroom, and our schools are fully open. But my advertisement's over. But I don't, we wouldn't necessarily hear from them until they're ready to register. So we can certainly check with Laura, though, our district registrar, and see if she knows a little bit more. And certainly Dr. Krente, if you do, you're welcome to jump in. Now,
I think George had a question as well.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure if this is a question or not, but with such a large number of basically front-loaded retirements for this fiscal year, the 30 that you were mentioning, which means the pipeline is going to be very thin for next year and the year after. But with those savings of 24,000, say 24.5 for 30 people, and this is not a gotcha question, Dr. Luzzi, but where did that money go? Because I think we did the budget based on an assumption of 10 people retiring.
Sure. So you'll see it in the reforecast. And I'm going to let Dr. Keating get into the specifics, but that is one of the real advantages of doing the reforecast the way that we do, right? So we can get to some actuals, especially since we have cost control, or it's not cost control. We have unit control, right? I haven't thought of it in a while, but we've got position control. Thank you. In our staffing, so we're able to encumber out those numbers much more precisely. But go ahead, Joanne.
Sure. So it is part of our overall savings for this year. If you take a look through the detailed budget by object and just kind of run down and compare, the budget numbers to our actual projections, you're going to see there is monies remaining in the salary accounts. And that has to do with a few different factors. One of them is the turnover savings. The other is the fact that we have a significant number of folks on LOAs that are generating savings. With that said, we did have to hire the new team at the middle school, almost a full FTE at the high school, and the world language folks to really make the model work this year. So those are unexpected expenditures. So overall, while we have a savings in the salary account, this certainly did help the overall budget absorb the unanticipated expenditures.
I just asked Joanne because I don't recall seeing it on my favorite schedule, which is why did the budget change?
Yeah, you know what? Because it's absorbed in all the line items, because once we reforecast out with position control, it goes into the regular teaching staff or the sped teaching staff or any of our support staff like social workers, psychologists, and so forth.
Okay.
Maybe
I'm
one
just gonna-
clarification. Oh, go ahead, Amy. Yep, you go ahead.
Yeah, Joanne, so I completely get how it's complicated to do staffing and everything in this situation. If we get through COVID, and that's a big if, and at that point, will some of the staffing pressures back off in terms of if, we don't have to, these smaller cohorts in different places, and obviously you need adults supervising kids. Is that, and I know that's like going forward, but that is something that, if we get back to just like with the sports teams, we'll be having that expense. Might we have, as we look forward, getting back to some of the additional staffing that you had to put in place for COVID backing off out years?
I mean, I can start, Brian, you certainly can add on. So this is part of the challenge with going forward with a 3-year look, because in our best case scenario, we would love to get back to normal. We want that more than anything. We don't think it's going to be on July 1st of this coming year. We're hoping it might be the second semester next year. But as you know, we have to have our staffing model set for classroom teachers in the beginning of the year. Perhaps the year after that, when we don't have the need to be so cohorted and segregated, there may be opportunities, and we certainly hope that that's the case. Brian?
Yeah, thanks.
No, I think that's perfect. Yeah, we do have some things built into those COVID expenditures, like our building substitutes. We wouldn't need those anymore, things like that. That would be some other savings. But yeah, that's, our staffing is driven by our enrollment. So it also depends upon what the outcome of the enrollment is. If there are people that, are moving in that maybe wouldn't have been if the real estate market does what we think we see it doing, then we may wind up staying right where we are with staffing if it fits within those guidelines.
So is, at the beginning when you talked about the budget drivers, and one of the big ones is of course COVID, the $900,000 expense. Sure. Is are the staffing costs somewhat absorbed in that?
All right.
The substitute staffing costs are?
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Just one other, Dr. Keating, one other clarification. I think I heard you say this. Why would, if there's a $250,000 surplus from the food services, you said we'll move it over to the health fund. Why would we move it to the health fund?
Well, last year when we were talking about budget in terms of the internal services fund and looking at ways to increase revenues into that fund, we had a close to $1 million fund balance in food service. And we were making around $250 a year, projecting to make around $250 a year. So instead of adding to the fund balance, we felt it was appropriate at that time to put 200 of that into internal services fund to help fund a portion of the food service workers' health insurance. But we're going to need to really be strategic, I think, at least for a few years with regards to that fund balance and getting it to a place where it really, we should be having up to, 10 to 15% of our costs covered in a fund balance. That's the National School Lunch Program standard.
Well, we could talk about that. I don't know why you'd have any.
Because you have to replace equipment. There's,
that's what the town's for. That's what you come to us for. You need a new stove. You need a new something. I mean, don't think you should be building. Well, again, maybe not for today's conversation, but we should talk about that. Well, that's one of the cash management initiatives we have across the town. Everybody has their savings account, and it's adding up to millions of dollars across the town. We've got to look at that hard. And I don't know that you need to create a savings account. Maybe some small balance. I could understand that for certain things. We got to stop the approach of everybody needs a savings account on top of the over forecasting and being conservative and a big general fund. It's millions and millions of dollars, and it's not necessarily necessary. So anyway, to be discussed.
Sure. Yep. Glad to have that discussion. The food service, as you know, runs as an enterprise, right? So it is a little bit different. I will just to add on to what Dr. Keating said about and Todd, the question about why moving that money over. That actually, those members on the town council who are here with us, who have been around for a little while, may recall 10 years ago, 9 years ago, was a member of the town council asking the question, why is the district paying for the insurance for the food service employees? And it had been a goal to try to get to a profitable enough state where we can start making that contribution. So the moment we got there, we had to pull back, but it had been a goal of ours for a long term, for at least since some of those conversations, which is another reason why we thought that was the right move. So, okay. All right. The questions about purchasing and finding synergies there, saving some money by doing some cooperative purchasing and procurement. Dr. Keating is welcome to get more specific around this, but I would just want to share, we're a school district, we use the Capital Region Educational Council, which is CREC, this consortium that comes right out of Hartford, that really gets the most competitive pricing for our procurement and our purchasing. And actually, it's not Fairfield County pricing, it's Hartford pricing, which is obviously a little bit less than what we wind up paying, just given the nature of things in Fairfield County and Westchester County. We used CREC, we save money through this consortium. There are times that we certainly do collaborate together with the town, things like the insurance we've talked about, the jointly bidding electricity, heating, fuel, the work that we do with our insurance, with liability, with auto, stop loss insurance, there's a long list. The work we do in technology, where we're sharing equipment throughout our infrastructure, things like that. Like there's quite a bit that we do together. As we look at it, certainly there may be a way, Joe and I were just talking about this today, where the town can take advantage of some of the correct pricing that we have, and we can sort of work together to get that going. Being one of 165 districts and making these purchases really gives you the purchasing power that you want on a large scale for those items that we're all using. So it does work to our benefit, but we will certainly continue to reach out to Linda and others and see if there's, I believe there is a mechanism that we can do that so that the town can also benefit from that pricing and that process as well. Some of the savings that we've experienced lately have been, and again, have we had slides and maybe would look a little different, but we thought we'd just give a quick list here. I mentioned before the rate freeze with the DATCO for this year saved us over $120,000. Mr. Tesber has been working very closely with our tuition out of district line, and there's a reduction there as well. We have worked to insource, as you know, we've been insourcing some key functions, including our maintenance. Just the other day, Dan Clark was talking about how in doing the east roof, there were old abandoned electrical lines there that instead of building that into the project, our electrician was able to go in to manage those, to remove those abandoned lines instead of having to pay somebody else to do it and build it in a project that then gets bonded and paid back over time. Our guys are just able to go out there and do it. Same goes with like flashing, HVAC, other work like that. So the insourcing of key functions continues to save us money. Might be hard to put an exact amount on it, but it's, I'd say it's at least approximately this 100,000 here. The solar installations have been successful for us. This gets broken out a little bit back in the capital part, but just again, at a high level, installation of solar at south, at east. Those are both up and running at this point. We've got west and a portion of Saks. They're ready to go, happening in the spring. And then we're looking at the high school roof and the opportunities that are there. All of that leads to, again, close to $100,000 in savings we anticipate there. Work in special education, again, insourcing some key services. Independent, looking at our software, we're always looking, what don't we need anymore? What can we combine with different functionality? The last year, we didn't want to repeat all of it, as you know, but last year, as you'll recall, Joe Spurgeon came and talked a bit about the savings in insurance over the last, say, 5-6 years in negotiations and the ways that we've done both savings and some cost offsets and other things. This is a snapshot, and glad to talk about any of it, of course. The last piece is the savings from curtailment of sports teams and other things. Todd and Amy, I think you mentioned a little bit in the beginning, Linda may have as well. sort of the savings, and then of course there are increased costs. So there's, the savings are there, and then we do have to spend some more for those COVID expenses from time to time. And you see the numbers right there. And again, anyone is welcome to fill in the blanks if there are any. Or any questions?
Any question? Look, that's an excellent summary. Appreciate that again on the $1 million of net projected savings. That's helpful as well to know. And does anyone on the board have any questions there? That's a great summary and answer to the question. Trying to. Tucker, you see anybody with a hand up? Yep, George, go ahead. You're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah, I just to follow up on, this is more than $250,000 savings in tuition out of district line item. And I was just wondering what drove that savings, Doctor?
It was a combination of a few things. We brought some students back into district. We're always looking, to find opportunities where students are ready to return to district. So we brought a couple students back partway through the year. And we had a student who moved out of district as well. So there were a couple of factors that led to that. But part of being able to bring those students back into district is always looking to increase that internal capacity. We had a student come back to the alternative school, the downtown campus, which was nice to see. And we had a student come back into launch as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could I ask with the students who came back, I'm just curious, was it because we were in school and where they were going was remote, or where they were going was remote as well? I'm just curious.
In both those instances, it had less to do with the remoteness, whether they were remote or in person. It was more about the programming that the students required at this time. We were a better fit for them at this time. So it was less about the distance learning and COVID. It really wasn't the factor. It was more about the internal programming that we could offer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. We've talked about the building substitutes with COVID and the permanent substitutes. Again, glad to go into any more detail around that. But really it's been a key strategy for us to keep our buildings open. It's actually been quite difficult to find day-to-day subs, people willing to sort of come in as needed. But having the certified teacher as a substitute means that they can step in where we need them, whether for a day, for a week, for a 14-day quarantine or something, along those lines, and keep our operation running. And Darlene, you're welcome to add anything if you like.
I just agree with what you just said in terms of the fact that it's a much better model in terms of us being able to accommodate a variety of different staffing needs. It's worked out really well, and the person knows the building.
So this budget anticipates them remaining on through half the year in the COVID expenses. The ESSER grant, Joanne mentioned that earlier, that we're looking at approximately $442,000. It's that money's being, every school in the state is getting some to varying degrees. So that's meant to help us for some of the cost. It's also meant to be used to help if you have a need for programming for students, to help them to catch up in different ways. So, but we want to make sure the Board of Finance is aware of that as another resource.
But just on that number though, the 442, now, is that going to offset the special appropriation that we made? What's
this would be going forward, right? So this could be used for the number that on that first page of the 909.
Yep.
This could be put towards those costs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it is an entitlement grant with specific requirements and guidelines. But within that list of 909, Tracy and I looked at it the other day, and we believe that expenses within that category comply.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. And similar to the substitute teachers that we have across the district, we have an increase of the 4 custodians because the cleaning and disinfecting protocols are more stringent than your typical cleaning. So this helps us to perform the appropriate strategies, as we need to. And these costs, and again, what I'm going to show you right here is on page 102 of the document itself. But we've gone through, and I'm not sure if that's very legible, maybe too small, but you may do better seeing it in your budget. Let's see if I can actually maybe expand it.
This was the funding into the non-lapsing account.
There we go. So July 1 to September 30, 2020. This is what we spent the money on. And I believe some of you may have seen this in one of our resources meeting earlier. Okay.
Now, there are funds that we received after this appropriation. I believe it's going to be close to 250 when all is said and done. That is going to offset and mitigate these, these expenditures up to 250.
Joanne, do you want to continue about the COVID expenditures?
Oh, sure. So there's two types of grants, FEMA and then the educational entitlement grants. The FEMA reimbursements go directly to the town as a revenue. And Bill Ostman's been moving that forward, been the leader on that on the town side. Tracy gives him the information for expenditures and he uploads them to the platform at FEMA and manages that. In addition to that, we have the three different funds, the CRF, and we have the ESSER 1 and 2. Those two it's the first two are the 250 and then the 442. So those would be the total amount of expenditures coming in under the entitlement grants. So those are treated for accounting purposes as a special revenue fund. You have to put it into the grants entitlement fund by federal regulation. And then the expenditures go against that fund. So with regards to the 1.9 million from the non-lapsing account, we had to actually move 250 of expenditures into the grant fund. And so you'll have a balance in that non-lapsing of around 250. That's how that'll work. Same thing with the 442. If we need all of the 909 or more, 442 of it will be moved into this special revenue account so that the revenues and expenditures are in one statement for the federal government, and then the non-lapsing would take the balance. So it's not a duplication. We're not keeping the funds for something other than the purpose they were provided to us for. And Linda, Joanne Noon and Tracy and I have been working together on that. So the negative balance, it's really unallocated in the budget. It is going to be around, we feel $1 million, give or take. It could be more. Last year, we seemed to continuously increase as we were not able to engage in certain programs for the district. So it could be more. If something unanticipated happens where we need to spend more for COVID or some unforeseen need comes up, it would definitely go before our board. And that would be reported out on our monthly statement. And I would give Linda heads up on that. The 2.2 million in savings from last year was just unspent in our budget. And the accounting for that is that revenues were obtained through tax levy. We didn't spend the revenues that were needed to meet our expenditures. So it went to the fund balance. And I think that was Amy's earlier point there. It was close to the 1.9 million that we needed to at least initially get through our COVID expenditures. The corridor on the insurance question here, it's an interesting question. I had gone over before the fact that our claims were $2.2 million below at the end of last year when all was said and done. Going into this year, we are looking like we're tracking about 13.3. I mean, we actually did the numbers straight out. And then we had this large drawdown this past week, but the average has been about 255, 873, and a weekly drawdown. We do have $500,000 coming in this year, as I stated before, and for stop loss reimbursement for one very large claimant. And so that actually is a net number for claims, how we reported on the financials. So going into next year, even if we held flat at 13.2 on claims, and we'll work through this, I'm sure, as a team, but you're still looking at a close to a $500,000 difference, so to speak, because of that reimbursement. By how much? Okay.
Well, number
I'll pause
28
there.
is a little bit of a process question. So
Okay.
the Board of Ed is involved. So what happens with our budget process, as you know, and I know you've read through, so it's in that letter in the very beginning, but we start very early internally. We loop the board in through the resources committee along the way. We have in December, we have our budget workshop where we share ideas and get feedback and make some determinations about moving things forward or deferring or doing some other things. And then the superintendent's budget comes to the Board of Ed in January. After that, we have a resources meeting with the full board to take a look at it, to work through, to get some feedback. And actually some of the really good, I believe, ideas around this year's budget, given the unusual nature of everything we're dealing with, flow from that resources committee in those conversations. Things like the waiting for the attachment point for the stop loss in order to fund up the insurance, looking at, a non-lapsing count, other pieces like that. So the board is involved not just with sort of what's in the budget, but even around some of the budget management as we go through that process. So we also share it with the community and get feedback from parents through the TFA, PTCs, and others. So it is an interactive process, purposefully designed that way, but also pretty front loaded. There's a lot that goes on in October, November, December that leads into January before we do it. The leaves of absence, I believe Dr. Keating mentioned that, briefly, sort of what's going on, sort of how that's working, and glad to get more specific about that if you like. The substitute cost, we talk about interns. Interns are an offset for subs, essentially. So when we bring in interns who are students working towards getting their certification through a university, Sacred Heart, University of Bridgeport, Fairfield U, and they serve as substitutes while they're in our building. And then at night they go to classes. That's an intern model that we use. Either way, we have to pay somebody to cover the class. So if it's not an intern, it's a sub. So we combine those accounts. And again, Joanne, you're welcome to get more specific if you like.
Sure. I don't have a heading, and I apologize for this, under the 290. And that is the amount that we're putting aside for the 12 building subs for half a year next year. So that is not typically in our budget. So if you really compare year over year, we're actually going down in our substitute plus intern account. And the reason for that is that we're expecting the beginning of the year to be similar to this beginning of the year, where our subs, we didn't have as many subs. They were hard to find. And the overall cost was a reduction as well. So it's not an increase, it's actually a decrease going into next year's budget. That's one area we're certainly going to watch, and we watch every year because it's so variable depending on the circumstances of the staff. But we feel at that time with the half a year of the building subs, the permanent building subs, that it's a good budget.
Joanne, can you just clarify this? Michael Chen, can you just clarify? I'm a little confused. In your presentation, you have staff going up by 1.5 staff total, I think. Is this 12 additional substitutes included in that staffing, or this is on top of the staffing number, I think of 753 that you have in your budget?
Right, so the 12 is not included in those staffing numbers. They're not in this year's numbers or next year's number because they're not going to be recurring. They're basically, the funding for them for next year is basically coming out of subs that we would have had. But they're permanent subs for a half year as they were this year, and they're not part of our staffing model.
Okay, so they're coming out after this year's budget. Got it.
Yeah, mid-year.
Okay, thank you.
Just one point of clarification. So is the contract year for the permanent subs the same as a school year?
For this year, it is. For both the custodians and the
teachers. Putting in
teachers.
half a year?
Well, next year, we are going to have a half a year contract with them.
Oh, so next year, you're only going to have a half year. This year, you have a full year contract with them.
Correct, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
With the anticipation that we'll be in a better place with the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Okay.
So and we touched on 31. So with that, I mean, I know it's 9 o'clock, but I would love to transition to capital if there's time with the Board of
Yeah,
Finance
no,
here.
let's definitely do that. I mean, I would put a summary on this to say it's a really good budget. I think you did a really great job answering these questions. There's a lot of great data here. If you could send this back to us, would be terrific. Really, I think the things for us to nail down are the savings and how they're going to apply the button up the COVID expenses in the health services fund. I mean, honestly, goodness, I think it's really great job. And as we go through this, the answer is if we have anything to follow up on. But it's nice job answering those. And again, I think a lot of work went into this to do a really good job in the first place.
Well, thank you. And we were grateful to have questions in advance. It helps us and frames our thinking. What we thought we'd do, capital is, obviously, as you know, a separate budget, and there were some questions that came through here, but Dr. Keating had shared, and Dan Clark to a degree had shared a kind of an overview of how we approach capital with the Board of Selectmen or the Selectmen's Advisory Committee on Buildings and Infrastructure. And I thought if it's all right that we could quickly walk through that here with you to just sort of give a quick overview. And George and Neil are both serve on that as well. So if you'll indulge us for just a couple of minutes, we'll take a look through that. George, I see you shaking your head. Yes, I'll take that as an affirmative. Okay. It's very hard to read the room when you're all in little boxes.
Hollywood squares.
So true.
That's right. Let's see. All right, Dr. Keating, I will. Maybe, let's see, Wheel of Fortune might be more apt because I will navigate your slides for you.
Thank you.
Is that clear?
I think so. So Neil and George and Penny Young, Penny Rashid and Kevin, thank you for bearing with me for a second look at this. It's going to be a repeat for you guys, but I think it's important for us to express to this board and to the town council, how we approach our major facilities projects. And quite frankly, they're all major for us because they all contribute to providing a beneficial learning environment for our students and our staff. So we have project teams and we approach this from a very, I think, appropriate and comprehensive viewpoint. And I'm going to use the roof projects that we've had as a sample so that you get a good understanding of how we approach our roof projects. And from what I heard from Tiger, it's a similar project on the town side. But from our perspective, as Tiger has an expertise in the type of buildings he operates, we have an expertise in our schools. We've been operating them for myself. I've been in this profession for over 30 years with these responsibilities. And Dan's been in schools for around 15 and in hospitals prior to that. So we have a lot of combined capital and capacity, and we bring it to bear and we share that and try to benefit the town of New Canaan with our knowledge. So with that said, our project team starts with the superintendent. Brian is very involved with all of our scheduling of projects. We have our 5-year plan over the years. We review it every single year, but more frequently throughout the year as our projects are scheduled. Dan actually has an action board that takes up an entire wall of his office, like a Gantt chart, but it sits up there so that when the guys come in and the different staff and the different consultants, they can see where we stand with our projects. I'm involved, as I said, Dan. The school principals are a very important part of our teams, as are the head custodians in the building. And as we mentioned before, we have expertise on our mechanical staff, which includes an HVAC mechanic. We have a licensed plumber and a licensed electrician. And we have some highly skilled carpenters on our staff. And they really help us to analyze situations, number one, but number two, perform some of the work so that that they know exactly what's going on, number one, but Also to reduce costs. We deal with design professionals when appropriate, engineering professionals when appropriate. And of course, the engineering is such a diverse and vast area of study. You know, there's everything from a civil engineer to a mechanical engineer to an electronics engineer. So the field of engineering is vast and very specialized. And so it's important to work with people with the expertise. We talk with the material manufacturer for the warranty compliance, the building department. We deal with Brian Platts and his team throughout projects. And of course, the contractor, the successful bidder, is a part of our team as well. So we have project objectives that are very specific to our needs. And they start with the design and development of our specifications and the competitive bidding process that we go through to deliver an effective quality project for the schools. So our goal right now for the roof at the high school, and it has been, we received funding last year in the 2021 budget, $100,000 to actually develop the specifications, doing all the field work, the research, and so forth, so that we could get out to bid at this time of year, which we're close to getting out to bid, and award the contract so that the town had a good sense when they set it's a bonded project, the bonding in May, you'll know exactly where we expect to come in or very close to it. So a lot of thorough research goes into investigating existing systems. And that was certainly the case with regards to the high school roof. There was a lot of conditions that we did uncover that we weren't aware of. And so they've become an integral part of the specifications. We analyze our options to provide the best, most cost-effective materials, warranties, and applications. And with roofs, there are different types of roofing applications. We estimate duration of the project, which is extremely important for schools because we need to consider all of our options for scheduling the work, decide how to bid out the work based on that educational need and program. So with the high school roof, it's a vast roof. It's probably going to take longer than a summer period. And so we are going out in two different ways. On the high school roof, we're going to bid it as a single summer project, which would probably require multiple crews, or a 2-summer project. And in talking with the consultant, it's going to be interesting to see where these bids come out. But once we have them and we're looking at what the cost is, it will give us the information we need to determine whether or not we'll be able to manage based on the most cost-effective bid. We identify all the trades that are involved with the project, and we talked about the extensive mechanical systems on our buildings, much of which reside on the roofs. We evaluate feasibility and cost-effectiveness of solar. That's been a key thing for our roofs for the last 2 projects at South and East, and they certainly have been successful. We develop comprehensive specifications, including the contract. We deal with a contract specialist from our legal firm, and she is very well versed in school projects. We do all of our schedules, our alternatives. The goal is to provide a very tight bid spec that minimizes change orders, and it contributes to us getting our projects done on time and delivering it within budget with minimal disruptions to our schools. We bid out the project early in the year to maximize the number of quality of the bids. So we get a lot of people who haven't really had their summers filled in yet. And we do get the 4 to 5 really top roofers in this case in the state of Connecticut, and they really want to block in their summer schedule. So we do get some very competitive bids. We analyze bids and we qualify the lowest responsive bid. Of course, we obtain funding and then we award the bid. So we have project oversight goals as well. We want to ensure the least amount of disruption for our students and our staff. And oftentimes when you're doing a project, and sometimes even, you would think a roof is outside, but if they're penetrating the roof system and they're replacing mechanicals and so forth, and there's children or staff that are occupying the rooms below it, we have to relocate them throughout the school. So it's very important that we have team meetings on a weekly basis prior to the start of the project, throughout the project, and through the end of the project. You know, our goal is to run our schools smoothly throughout the construction process and ensure that the project adheres to all of our safety requirements, which is in addition to being, you know, physical safety in terms of how the site is set, but also the background checks on all of the individuals who are coming on site to work. And we put them through a process in our HR department, and that extends over to our campus monitors and who they have to check in with daily. So we have to know, they know exactly who the people are on the site in order to manage it. We want to complete the project within budget with minimal change orders, obviously, and we want to be on schedule. And at the end of the day, we want to provide the town and our children with a quality project. So we do have our weekly meetings on site with all the team members or those that need to be there for the particular meeting. We have on-site daily oversight. For a roofing project, we do have a clerk of the works who does represent us and ensures that the project is being installed as spec'd. We have consistent coordination, communication, inspections, and reporting, and we modify our plan as needed and make decisions in the field. And then when throughout the process, and then when all is said and done, we do report out to the Board of Education's Educational Resources Committee, the full Board of Education, and now the Board of Selectmen's Advisory Infrastructure Committee. So just to give you a sense of the recent 2 projects that we completed here in New Canaan. So we had estimates prepared by Silver Petrocelli, which is an architect firm, back in 2014. That plan has been updated for the mechanical portion of the study in 2019. But the 2014 pricing is, as you see here, the actual pricing on the projects you can see as well. And so we came in under budget on South, which had 26 independent roofing systems that were designed for that particular project, under budget by 400,000. East was under by 120. The change orders on South were a little over 50,000. 35 of the change orders, 35,000 of the change orders related to getting the building solar ready, which was a plan that we had. We didn't have the drawings or the plan for the solar project when we bid the project out. So they had to come through as change orders, but 35 of the 50 on a $2 million project, which came out to be 1.8. And then over at East, we had 14,000 in change orders for this entire project, 10 of which were for solar ready. So in addition to these roofs, you know, when I was over in Weston, we did 3 roofs, Richfield 3 roofs as well. So just in my 20 years of experience, the last 20 years, we have a lot of roofing experience, major schools.
And Joanne, these are 30-year roofs, I believe, right? So you won't be redoing these roofs. None of us probably will.
Right. I mean, you know, they're flat roofs. They're not pitched roofs for the most part. I mean, there's certain sections on some of the schools that have a pitched roof. Saks over the cafeteria, the 3rd building at West, but for the most part, they're flat roofs. Different type of system than town buildings. So where do we stand with the high school roof replacement project? You know, we chose to push this up on the schedule, even though the aging of the roof would not be considered old because we have membranes and joints that are failing. And it's creating leaks in the building. And you can see it going through the building. We walk the buildings, the administrators walk the buildings, you know, for example, the 3rd floor where the science wings are, you know, you look up in the ceiling and there's water stains on the ceiling tiles and, you know, it's coming in somewhere. We have our roofing company come in, they trace it, they have sophisticated equipment to identify it and spot it and then plug it, and then something else pops somewhere else. So it needs to be done because the roof is failing. As I said, there's numerous leaks throughout the building. And the air quality is a concern. I mean, you know, we have been able to stay on top of it, but anytime you introduce moisture into a space, it does, you know, create concerns about air quality. And finally, we have decking issues. there are definite decking issues that were discovered in the field when we were doing the research for the for putting the specs together. And we use a structural engineer that the town suggested a few years back, Tom DeBlasi. Had great success with him, and he participated in the planning, and the ultimate specifications will involve some of his work as well. We began the project in 2020, last year. And I just talked about the engineering study. The bid specs right now, we spoke with the designer today, and they're probably closer to 99% complete. We just have, we're waiting on the structural engineer for some last pieces. We're going to go out to bid. We'll be opening up the bids mid-March, and we will have qualified bids prior to the setting of the budget.
Great. And certainly glad to take any questions. Thought that was important because, as you know, whereas we're going to look at the capital request next, by far the largest item is that high school roof, right? So I thought it made an awful lot of sense as a.
I think in terms of the committee, the Selectmen Advisory Committee, we've made some progress. Joanne, maybe you could talk about it in terms of sharing information between the town and the BOE. You know, we haven't always done the most perfect job doing that and informing each other. Everyone's busy, and it's not really part of the process. You don't need to inform each other contractually or anything. But I think we had a meeting yesterday that someone else referenced, maybe you did, Brian, where people, I think, really made a commitment to sharing more information, which would benefit the town. And it just felt different like that. I'm hoping, Jill, and you say I felt it too, because it was a good thing. But you want to comment on that? So now, if, for instance, if you went, give you the same scenario of the roof tiles, the solar panels, and where the town would get involved versus before.
Yeah, I mean, we have been working with the town on solar. The CHP is another area we've been working closely with them, I think. I think those are great projects for us and for the town. They're certainly going to save money over time, and they're far more cleaner than what we're doing with the more fossil fuel type of heating products. But, you know, I do feel like, at least from my perspective, that we do partner with the town. They're good partners. Tiger does our repaving projects. He does a good job. I mean, you just take a ride through the high school, what was done last year, it's phenomenal. Yep. And so he has a lot of areas where he has an expertise, and we appreciate that. We're thankful for that. And, you know, likewise, we have areas that we feel like we can contribute a lot to as well. And that was the purpose of trying to make in the presentation, so that the town feels comfortable that we have the expertise to bring forward a really good project under budget or at budget that serves the town well. And if Tiger or Joe, the engineer for the town, would like to participate with us or be part of our team, or however that would look like, I mean, they're more than welcome. Last year, I believe, after the meeting on East Roof, Joe came over, he walked the roof with Dan, he had a few observations, he brought an engineering department. It's all good. I mean, anything we can do to talk with one another is beneficial. Yeah, but I do think there are certain areas where we do need to understand that it's important that the Board of Education, the administration in particular, oversees these projects.
While informing the town.
I'm sorry?
While informing the town.
Yeah.
So, well, this is, I'm trying to show the initiative of this committee and making decisions. So my question just was, do you feel that structure is going to also have more communication going? You know, we haven't, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a good avenue for communicating. it gives us an opportunity, it gave us an opportunity the other day to explain our process to you and hopefully get you comfortable and give you more information about how we handle our projects. And likewise, I mean, we've learned a lot from, different folks on the town side with the solar and other areas. So
it's getting better.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah, and I think it's also important to
so.
recognize that Penny serves on that committee as well, as Board of Ed rep and as, because of all the projects she's a part of with the town. So I think,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, nobody likes adding another meeting on the schedule, but that's one that we really try hard not to miss. And Zoom makes it a little easier to be there.
yeah, definitely.
thank you.
I have a quick question. This is Victor Alvarez. I really impressed by the good work you're doing with the solar and other energy saving techniques. And going back to the original mission in educating our children, do you tout any of the benefits from these projects to the student body?
We do. We have kiosks in the schools that where all the equipment connects into. And for example, if you go over to South, I believe there's one at both entrances. The kids can come in, they can get the profile load of the building. They can see energy consumption for specific timeframes and overtime. The package came with an educational component to it as well. And we have a science teacher at each of the elementary schools who use it with their curriculum. So it's a positive for the schools educationally as well.
Great.
Sorry, I can add to that too. After the completion of the South array system, the installers volunteered to do a little show and tell for the fourth graders at South School. And we're amazed at the depth of knowledge that the fourth graders had. Some of the questions they were asking the presenters about our solar system were very impressive. So as Joanne said, we do have the kiosk set up, also one in e-school. And I was contacted by the science department chief at the high school, and he would like access into the system so they could use them for educational purposes. So I'll be going up there tomorrow to talk to the high school about how we can make that happen for them.
Dan, I would just like to add that I'm very proud to hear about our fourth graders because we do energy conservation as one of our units of study in fourth grade. So I'm very impressed. And the high school does AP environmental science. And so they're very eager to get hold of that data and look at it. So thank you.
Okay.
Did you want to go through more capital?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw up on the screen the proposed capital budget. We, as you know, as we look in a few pages down, we have our 5-year look ahead. But I figured instead of putting up what's maybe illegible on the screen, we'll just focus on this year's priorities here. And there were some questions, and I think we can just answer them as we talk this through. Certainly, there was a question about, what we only want to see the high priority. In truth, when you look at it, we're only really looking at a couple of things here because these really are the highest priority. We know that that high school roof is a big number, and we're looking to see, what else, where can we kind of defer a little. And what you don't see is one of my my favorite projects, which will come back probably next year for the planetarium. But it doesn't make sense to ask the Board of Finance or town or anybody else to invest in the planetarium when where students aren't gathering all in one place due to COVID. So we'll get back to that when the time comes. But primarily, we're looking at that high school roof. We're looking at some safety items around the PA systems. They're aging out. We're spending more in repairs than it'll take to do the replacement. Look at that functionality. Certainly, there's a boiler replacement. And the Saks cogeneration plant, so some repaving and then painting at the buildings. And again, I will allow certainly Dan or Joanne, who work much more closely with this, to answer any questions or anything with sort of what we're looking at. But we would start with the highest priority would be that high school roof, given what Joanne was just describing. Then we'd look at boilers, certainly, no heat, no building, no school. And then certainly the safety pieces around the PA some of the outdoor work over at South. And the working with Tiger to do the parking lots, which, as Joanne mentioned, Tiger's always able to kind of loop us in if he's doing some other work somewhere else, and those costs we put him in, they wind up being placeholders, and he generally can trend them down based on using the materials and equipment when it's nearby, getting it in there. So. There was a question about splitting the cost of the paving over years, can it be in 2 years, things like that. Yeah, we've done that before too, right? And so we would look to see if it makes sense to do that with the funding and split it up over a couple of years. We certainly would look to do that if that was the right thing. And we've done it before. That's really it. It's pretty straightforward this year because of that big driver that we know.
And how much is the high school roof?
Yeah, toggle down to the bottom. Yeah.
Sure, it's right here. See the roof replacement phase 1. If we do it in 2 phases, we're looking at 3.5 per phase in 2 phases. We're also, as Joanne mentioned, looking at, can we do it in 1 phase and bring that cost down? If we can schedule it so that it's not disruptive to the program and to the school, and do it in such a way. Dan had mentioned the other morning, I think I heard him say that there's over 30 roofing systems up there that need to be planned for. And it's an enormous space, so it's very complex.
Also, I would just add that in talking with the designer for the project just recently, after he had most of the spec put together, of course, we are waiting on one more piece. He feels that these original budget numbers far exceed what it's going to actually come in at. So again, these are placeholders. But by the time you set the budget in May with the bonding, you'll have good numbers.
And these come from the 2014 study from the architects, Silver Pet?
Yes.
Yes.
Joanne, it's Amy. Can I just ask, with the roof, it's a flat roof, so it's harder, right? So what is really a projected useful life here? Because these aren't 30-year roofs, so, and was it supposed to be a 30-year roof flat roofs just don't, so I just, what can we reasonably expect the useful life if at this point? If you don't, that's fine too.
I believe it was a 20-year roof. What happened, and Penny probably can add, Penny Ration was part of that project, but they're 20-year roofs, and that was like the norm until a few years back, maybe 10 years, where they really came out with the 30-year roof, a reliable 30-year roofing system. And so it was probably after this. I'm sorry?
Even for flat roofs? I know flat roofs are notoriously difficult,
They are, yeah. So it's the useful life of a flat roof is different than a pitched roof. It's different materials, it's different wear and tear. You're walking all over them for the mechanicals and all that kind of thing. But
and do these come with some sort of guarantee or a period of time where they're guaranteed?
Yeah, there's warranties. We've been keeping electronic and hard copy files in numerous places for both South and East so that our predecessors can locate them if an issue comes up. And the warranty, especially with putting the solar on the roof, interestingly enough, like we've been using John Mansville roofing materials. They'll come out, they'll inspect the installation and the roof itself, the materials, and they'll give you a warranty. Then the solar company comes in, places the solar down, then they come back again and re-warranty it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a process so that you want to make sure that those panels are going to stay up there for 20 years. There's not going to be any issues with the roof. And the longer those panels stay up, they're actually protecting the roof from the sun.
Sure.
Over time. So.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Brian, could I ask one question? Under SACS, you have $400,000 for phase 2 of cogeneration. I think we had $775 in the town side budget this year for cogen and 1 boiler. So I'm confused by the 400 for cogen. Phase 2 and the $340,000 for 2 boilers. The boilers, we didn't have our meeting yesterday about boilers. We deferred that to March. But the boilers weren't in the 5-year plan before, and now we're doing 2 boilers all of a sudden. One of the boilers was failing, obviously, and that's the one you wanted to replace last year. But can you explain, or Joanne, explain the phase 2 for cogen?
Sure. If that's okay, Brian. So when we looked at the cogen plant with OLA, who is the engineer, and Joe was involved with that, Tiger at times, Dan and myself, they suggested that we need to replace, based on the load of the building, all 3 of the boilers that are at Saks. That a cogen could, and one functioning boiler, would not be able to carry the building. And that was based on their engineering study. OLA was the engineer for the addition and this most recent addition and the one before. So they had all the profiling information for the school. So we went out to bid for 3 boilers, and we used a portion of the 775 for the first boiler that needed to be replaced this year. Right now we're out to bid. In fact, we're going to be opening pretty soon in the next few days for a 75 kilowatt CHP unit. The engineers had suggested that we go with 2 75s for a total of 150, but the budget wasn't sufficient for that. So we're putting in phase 2 is 2 boilers and the other cogen. Now, the cogen that we're opening up now is designed to have all the piping installed to support both CHP units. So we have to really wait to see where the bids come in for, the first plant, phase 1, to determine whether or not 400,000 is too much, too little, and so forth. But the infrastructure is there to basically plug this unit in.
Yeah, that's something that George and Neil, having been involved in looking at this, could perhaps focus on, because and then the other thing is, why are we waiting on the high school? Why not put the high school in next year for your CHP? If boilers are not going, you can put CHP in without replacing boilers if they don't need to be replaced.
Well, the boilers at Saks need to be replaced. They were in our 5-year long-term plan to be replaced actually this current year. And we pulled them and said we were going to take a look at the CHP and replacing 1 boiler. When the study was done, the engineers said you need all 3 boilers replaced. A cogen and 1 boiler cannot carry the building. It's too big.
So at the high school, I believe part of it is phasing. And again, Dan or Joanne, you're welcome to provide more detail. But as we look at the roof, part of it is to understand what the output of solar will be on energy, what that contribution from the work that we're doing on the roof. And we look to solarize that roof because I believe as we approach each of these, we look at it sort of as a whole system. And so that doing the CHP at Saks, it will be our first CHP project, right? So we also want to learn, thinking that we've learned from that, look to the high school in the future year, figure out the solar and the roof and to get that project up and going. And then in the following year, look to do something with the CHP at the high school according to, just sort of phasing them in.
And if I could just add about the boilers, the 3 elementary schools and Saks, as you know, were either renovated or added on to in the mid to late 90s. So they're all the same age and they're all aging out over the next several years. So, and that's reflected in our 5-year plan. You can see the boilers are southwest and east, and that's how we prioritize them.
And one thing I would add on the boilers is that this is the gross cost. Mark Robbins has shared with us that there are opportunities for grants and for rebates that can account for up to 60% of the cost of the equipment itself. It's not for the labor to install, but the equipment itself, as we understand it. We're just confirming that. So that will bring these prices down, the cost down.
Good. He's been a good resource. George, did you have a question? I thought I saw you leaning in. No?
Yeah, not so much a question for this forum, but at some point we're going to have to make a recommendation to town council on capital expenditures for Board of Ed's budget request. And I know that there's an extensive review process that's within the Board of Ed or the school administration for a lot of these capital expenditures, including the combined heat and power and the integration of solar. But, we have Eversource, Zrex, combined heat and power, solar, the roof initiatives, and boiler replacements. And I don't really feel right now sufficiently educated on those to be able to make an informed and intelligent recommendation. So I think at some point, either in the Selectmen's Advisory Committee or somewhere offline, and I don't know how Neil feels about this, but I really would love to be able to sit down either with whoever it is in the Board of Ed or at the School of Men who runs these things and just get a better sense of comfort on how we're timing it out, why we're doing it, why we're sizing it the way we are, how it's being integrated or not being integrated with other solar initiatives for the town. I would just like to be more informed. And I know you guys have a million other things to do and 1,000 balls in the air at once. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to tell the town council either we think this is a good idea or we think it's a bad idea.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's an excellent idea, because what happens every time we present the budget is we go deep in the operating, and then it's after 9 o'clock and we start talking about capital. And it just happens that way. So to set aside an hour to sit and take a deep dive and to have the conversation, answer any questions and work through it all, I think that, that's something we can certainly figure out a time and a place to do between now and, the next couple of weeks before you have to pass that on. So glad to do it. I think that's an excellent idea.
Not next week, but the week after, we've got the 2 meetings and we do have cushion in that schedule. So maybe we'll just try to identify an hour in one of those final meetings just to have that update, George, with the summary. And maybe if you and Neil could just frame up what it is you're looking for so that we could have a nice clean view that we can understand, and then that'll give us the communication device to send over to the town council. Does that align with what you're thinking?
Yep. Yes, that would be great.
Let's do that. Perfect.
Great. Yeah, we're fishing water on this. So if we have a couple of questions to guide us, we can make sure we hit the slots. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. Joanne, anything else? That was really helpful.
Okay.
No? Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Brian, everything you've covered everything that you wanted to get covered for tonight?
I think so. Again, glad to take any questions.
Yeah.
I think that, the document is there, but we hit a couple of highlights. And, I think that if there's a few things that pop into your head between now and another couple of weeks, just send them our way. We'll write them up, get it right back to you and continue that conversation. Yeah, and just to again say thanks. This is it's a different format this year and forum, but glad to do it. We start our day on Zoom and end our day on Zoom, but it's nice to when we leave this meeting, I'm home. That's kind of a nice benefit.
Exactly. That allows us all to have an extra half an hour to talk.
That's not so bad.
Really great.
Everybody but Kevin.
Really great dialogue, even Kevin. Other questions or any other things that we're looking to do? Katrina, anything else you'd like to add to before we wrap? Or are we good?
No, I think we're good. Thank you for your time.
Can I just say just a big thank you? My youngest is now in 11th grade. So to me, I just, as a personal thanks for all the hard work. And I know it's not easy. I know this hybrid model, even if it's more in school now, which we're very grateful for. Personally, I'm very grateful for. But just thank you for everything that your teachers are doing. I know it's hard. I know it's stressful for all of them to do it in 2 different models for teaching. And you guys have done an amazing job, and we're just grateful for everything you guys have done in district. So please, thank you for everything.
Can't be said enough. Exactly. Very good. Okay, well, if there is no more or are no more questions, we'll have a motion to adjourn. That was our last item. Michael, motion to adjourn. Judy, second. Okay, all in favor? Aye, opposed, none. Thank you all very, 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 very much. Really great discussion.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night.
Everybody.
Thanks all.
You.